And our first agenda item is public participation. I see one public audience member. Would you like to speak?
Christine asked me to be here. I'm Barry.
Okay, great. And so I think, okay. I think we can move on then to the next agenda item, which will be the discussion about the ARPA priority list. So shall we just move our way down the list, or should we start with the slide that's in the POV?
We should start with Barry. Let Barry speak to his, Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest that we let Mr. Rosen speak, as his $2 million prize at the last select board meeting is probably the first item that we should speak of on this ARPA list, and then we can release him back for his evening, unless he'd like to stay and listen to us hash out the other 44 items.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Barry, the floor is yours.
Okay. I guess Christine had asked me to come tonight, I guess to explain why we are asking for $2 million. Or to answer any questions you have about where the $2 million came from. So I don't know if you have copies of the slide presentation. You don't.
Everyone was sent the timestamps of your presentation at the select board meeting. So hopefully multiple people have listened to it.
I've listened to it. Okay.
If you wanted to give the rundown, it's, and if I say anything wrong, overrule me and take back the floor. But my understanding is you're asking for $2 million. You've got at least a $6 million problem.
Correct.
This is for the North Acton treatment. And if we don't get this done, what were the 5 consequences you mentioned at the end of the slide?
The consequences, well, it just became a little more severe. We found out last night that I think it is 72 units. I think it's called the Strawberry Hill. It's either a condo or it's an apartment complex. I'm not quite sure. They petitioned the state for some money to get 72 of their units, which I guess is the total number of units, connected to the Acton Water District. They're going to get, as they told it to us, they're going to get a state grant to connect all 72 units to the Acton water unit, and we will have to connect them. So that's 72 customers, that additional customers we hadn't planned on. So we said we had about 98% of the town. It's just gone up by another 72 units that we will have to serve and provide water to them. So it makes it a little more complex. Essentially, we had a couple of choices in front of us. One is leave that unit offline all the time. We just had to take it offline again because it did not meet the standards required. So all 5 wells in North Acton that are serviced by that plant went offline again this week, and they will remain offline, and we will have to notify all the water takers in Acton what the latest ruling was and why it's offline, et cetera, and to defray expense, we're going to put that in everybody's next water bill. But that's a couple hundred gallons a minute that the town no longer has. The consequences of that, the short-term ones, were that you saw the water restrictions this summer. It's likely without that back online, there will be no outdoor use of water whatsoever. We are also entertaining, we are speaking to the DEP, putting a moratorium on all new water hookups. That is, no one will be allowed, if you're not hooked up, you will not hook up to Acton water. you'll have to go to either a private well or what they call a private public water supply, which is what the Strawberry Hill Apartments are trying to get off of, a private public water supply. They want all 72 units to take water from Acton public water supplier, the Acton Water District. So those are the consequences. Not making anybody happy. We are looking at doing a number of things, and we're doing them all simultaneously. One, we have a new well that we hope will come online in the future, but it's costing more money. I can't talk in detail about it because we're discussing it in executive session, but the state is going to require us to make additional land purchases before they'll permit that well. And again, it's executive session stuff, so I can't go into the negotiations. We don't know what is going to happen right now. So that's another expense that is coming up. Kelly's Corner is another expense. I'm not going to discuss that here. It's turning out to be much more complex than anyone thought. We looked at a short-term solution. The short-term solution would be try to put in some portable units, which has been done on the Cape to try to remove some, but not all, of the PFAS, removing enough to get 20 or less parts per trillion. It's a quick solution, it's a cheap solution initially, but it gets very expensive because we're paying a third-party vendor to basically bring in trailers. Put the solution there as a package solution and run it, and you pay rent on it forever at whatever rate. However, we know, but we don't know when, the restrictions on PFAS are going to be reduced. Reduced meaning they get more stringent. Right now, the state requires 20 parts per trillion on a measurement of six of the compounds. Will they add 8 compounds, 10 compounds, 15? No one knows. It's a guess. Will they reduce it from 20 parts per trillion to 10? No one knows. So we looked at a solution that we asked the state for permission to pilot, which you have to get permission because we're regulated. And they granted us that permission. They gave us a permit, and we piloted a solution that we believe will take care of the problem short term, and hopefully the solution will be there as they reduce it. We will have a 2-part solution that'll take care of most, if not all, of future restrictions. Again, no one knows what the future restrictions, if any, will be. So what we did is we piloted a solution which cost the district $300,000+ to pilot because you have to pay to bring in solution providers. We paid for that. The state did give us a grant for that almost after the fact. They gave us money for that, but that's all they'll do. We have applied to the state for another grant to provide continual bottled water solution for, I guess you know, we're giving bottled water rebates for people that are pregnant, have infants, are nursing, or they're immunocompromised, so they don't have to drink the current water. Those are the people that are considered at-risk populations. So we took the step of, I guess you call it a rebate program. If you're an Acton water taker, whether you're a rental or whether you own your parcel, we will give you rebates to go out and buy bottled water. We're also looking at some other programs, but we've asked the state if they can help us continue the program because when the money runs out, it runs out. We've asked the state for money to continue it. We haven't heard back in 3 months, so we're waiting. The solution that we ultimately came up with was a permanent solution which requires enough hardware that it cannot fit into the existing plant. It requires a minimum of a 36 by 36 building attached to the plant, which would have, based on feedback that we received from the Massachusetts DEP, to make sure there's some redundancy there also, it would require 2 very large tanks, each holding 20,000 pounds of activated charcoal, and beyond that, in series, would be something called ion exchange. That's what we're hoping will take us to the next level and produce something for the future, assuming the state will probably reduce things. That came out to a total package of about 5.5, with what the DEP is asking will probably be much closer to the 6 million. All the money does not exist. I'm not going to go through the whole budget, but it doesn't exist with everything we try to do. So we're trying to at least share part of the cost with the town who we serve. That's our only customer, other than a building in Boxborough that we have to serve for now. Had no choice. We also served the school in Littleton, but once the school went to do, the state told us to serve it. Once the school moved out of that building, went to a permanent building, we don't serve Littleton anymore. So we serve 98 point, whatever these 72 units would be, 98.5% of the town. So we're looking for some aid. So we're asking for $2 million of the ARPA funds. And we told the town manager, and we told the select board, take the 100K that they were going to put toward Kelly's Corner, take that and put it toward PFAS. We consider that a critical solution for the town and for the town's safety. Going forward, we think that's the best, and of course it's our opinion, we think that's a good use of $2 million to try to get the North Acton treatment plant and 5 of our wells back online on a permanent basis. Questions?
Mr. Borden? Mr. Willinghoff?
Hi, thanks for explaining this in more detail. And yeah, I mean, just from my perspective, it's obviously a new topic and it sounds high priority. And
it's not one that we wanted,
sure.
Believe me.
Understood completely. Just from with the water district's perspective, and forgive me for not knowing off the top of my head, but it's completely self-funded, right? Is it just user fees paying the use of water?
It is user fees and debt fees.
Debt fees.
Which we separate out from we purposely separated that out from the water fees so people could see what the debt fees were as we invested money.
Yeah.
It's just transparency. That's the only reason we did it.
And so it sounds like the ultimate number that you need to upgrade the equipment and get things back online to compliance levels is $5.5 to $6 million. And
correct.
If I could paraphrase, you're looking for the town to potentially step up with $2 million of the ARPA money. How will the difference between $2 million and $6 million be funded?
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. How will the difference between 2 and 6 million? How will that 4 million be funded?
Well, the state and federal governments have both said no.
Okay.
And the reason is the federal government doesn't have a standard. The federal government has a guideline, quote unquote, of 70 parts per trillion. Our guideline, our standard, we have a standard regulation in the state now,
yeah,
is 20 parts per trillion of just 6 of the compounds. The total cannot be over 20 parts per trillion. Where are we going to get the rest of the money? We are probably going to have to go back to the voters and ask them if we could fund $4 million. We just asked them for $1 million permission to take money out of what's left of the grace funds to help us fund what's called the Assabet well number 3, which is currently offline, and we're trying to get it back online. And the voters granted us the $1 million, so we withdrew money out of the grace fund to do that. So that's been drawn down also.
And so is the 4 million, if I understood that, the voters, you said the voters, not the water district users?
Our tradition is we always go back to the voters. Usually, it'll probably have to be a special meeting, but we will go back to the voters and ask them if they will approve the incremental funds, which again, we estimate 4 million.
Sure.
Until the engineers actually get the design approved by the Massachusetts DEP, we can't tell for sure.
Yeah, forgive me, but when you say voters, who do you mean
The
specifically?
voters, the water district voters are the voters of the town of Acton.
Yeah.
So are you asking, does the money come out of reserve fund, or does the money get passed into future user fees?
Ultimately, yeah.
That's what he's asking, Barry. Where does,
so are
if
the
you
users
go
going
back
to-
to the users and it gets approved for $4 million, where do those $4 million come from? Do they come from town reserves, or do they come in the form of increased user
They
fees
could,
to?
depending on what they approve, they could come out of an increased debt fee.
Point of clarification, the water district holds its own annual meeting, has its own
Oh,
moderator.
I see what you're asking.
You know, it doesn't come before the main town meeting.
That's right.
And so general fund or free cash reserves, stabilization funds are not applicable to.
No, it
water
comes,
district.
the Acton Water District holds an annual meeting,
That's what I thought.
like
you
town
meant.
meeting,
Yeah.
and we bring most everything in front of the voters. A warrant, just like, similar to the town warrant.
The voters of the Acton Water District.
Which are the voters of the town.
Sure, understood.
Whether they
Just-
take
just to
water or
draw the
not, they
line there. But then what they could theoretically vote on is the $4 million at whether to charge higher user fees or to debt fund that. Would that probably be the vote that would be put towards
We're
them?
probably going to ask for debt because we haven't raised the user fees for 4 years. And the free cash got pretty low. We just finished our audit. And Mora and company told us, you're going to have to increase the water rates. So that's coming. But we have our own FinCom that will recommend to
Right.
us what to do, but we don't do it without them. They're, like you, they're independent.
And just, this is an unfair question, but
Well, go ahead and ask a fair question.
sure. If you look at an average household's water bill, and let's say it was $100, and you may not know this, but what would the difference between be financing that with 4 million of debt or user fees? It'd probably be relatively close. Is that kind of right?
Right now, they're about to go up because of what's happening in Central Acton. Right now, they are paying a debt fee that's $60 a quarter. It's about to go up, and I don't know what FinCom, they did tell me, but I don't recall what they told me it has to go to. Because some more debt for the Central Acton water treatment plant.
Sure.
It's getting close to being finished. We're going to have to start paying the debt on that, so that will be additive.
So I'm just going to make up numbers, but just directionally, see if I can kind of get close. If it's $60 a quarter for the current per household bill,
It is.
and ignoring this.
It's $60 a quarter, whether you take water or not.
Okay, so if hypothetically you pass along the 6 million in water fees, the entire 6 million to the users, how much of what sort of size of a number would that be? Would it be $50 a quarter? Would it be $10 a quarter? Would it be $1 a quarter?
I'm probably not the guy to ask.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. I'm just trying to get just
It
a,
depends how they feel they can fund it with the debt that we're running up and with the debt we know is going to come with an additional land purchase that the
Yeah.
state's going to require us to make. Land in this town is not cheap.
if you'll let me just ask one more question to put a point on it is, how much debt does the district currently have outstanding?
Oh, I should have brought the treasurer with me.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry, I don't know.
No, understood.
It's substantial debt, and a lot of it came due because of things we have to do right now. Part of it, and the reason it's high, and we don't want to lose our rating, and that's why we asked the voters to let us make an exception and withdraw from the grace account, is because we did not want to add additional debt. We're already being hammered by people for the debt fees impacting poorer families and wealthier families, and we're trying to find a way to ameliorate that now our FinCom is debating how they can work that now. So we're not looking to keep cranking up those fees. But PFAS was a surprise. It was, well, not just us. It was a surprise to a lot of public water suppliers. That's just very difficult to mitigate, and it turns out very expensive. We have never, and I mean not just us, no one has ever had to measure in parts per trillion. Parts per billion was high, but parts per trillion, it's like a part per trillion, 20 parts per trillion is like putting 20 drops of liquid into 20 Olympic-sized pools. That's how small it is, and we're being measured on it. And there are very few laboratories that can test down to 20 parts per trillion, even below that. There are a handful of labs which makes the testing not one of our $150 tests, it makes them $300 some odd tests, and you've got to we're required to run them every month. We rotate them every month, and there's no reimbursement for that. That's out of the budget. So you've got 23 wells here being tested. No choice. And the tests are very expensive, and you must use the labs that have been certified by the Massachusetts DEP. There's no choice in that. You have to use their labs. And many of them are out, like the one we just sent out a bunch of tests. They had to go out to Indiana. They got to be FedExed overnight. And the reason is, I didn't know this until it was explained to me, the temperature of the water, when it's tested, cannot change. It has to be, so it's got to be overnighted to a lab, and they have to get to it right away. Or you've got to do the testing all over again, which we just had to do. That's how I found out about that. So there's a lot of expense that PFAS is causing, and it's no one's fault.
Just one last one is, if this is state requirements and compliance, is the state providing any money to? Okay.
No.
I knew the answer, I just wanted to ask.
The short answer was yes. They gave us $300,000 to find an engineered solution. They paid for our pilot. You have to pay a private company to come in. I mean, they don't do it for free. You don't just test drive a car. We had to come in, buy all the materials, do everything, and to make sure that the state would accept it and we would accept it, we had to hire a third party, a disinterested third party, to run the testing with our hands off and try all the permutations of the 4 solutions with us watching in the background and reporting it weekly to the state, well, to Massachusetts DEP, part of the state. And that's why we've got, in fact, I got the letter here that says, yeah, we're approving it.
Mr. Gordon. Thanks, Barry. Question, does that test you're talking about, the $300 month, is that every well has to be tested every month?
Yeah, we're trying to, the state is allowing us to try to rotate a little bit to drop our expense. But basically, every well is tested on a rotating basis at a different time of the month, but yes, every month.
So it's so it's $6,900 a month roughly that you have to pay to.
Plus for the test.
Plus the overnight fee.
You have to FedEx them.
And how much water is, when it's shipped, how much water is sent?
How much water is?
From each well, is it a gallon, or are you sending?
Oh, how much do we send?
Yeah, like a gallon each well, or a couple of
I
gallons?
have to ask Matt. It's a good-sized vial. Probably it's a pint, I would guess.
Okay.
Maybe a pint, maybe a quart. Maybe it's a quart. I've seen the containers. It's in liters. I'm guessing maybe it's a quart or a liter, something like that.
Okay.
It's all metric.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Major?
Hi, Barry.
Hi.
This,
I remember you from, I bought a sign from you.
yes, you did. Well, you didn't buy it from me,
I know.
This PFAS,
PFAS, yes.
if it's in our aquifer, that means it's something that's probably not just unique to the town of Acton.
It's not. Boxborough, their measurements are measuring, Boxborough's got private wells, and some of the people are testing it.
But it's the same water, though.
It's similar. It's not the same. It didn't get there naturally. It got there, somebody put it there. And we're in a class action lawsuit. That's going to probably take years, but we joined a class action lawsuit.
So the instigator, the provider of this PFAS in our water, is a local entity? You heard it's an identified entity?
I don't know if it's been identified. For example, in a quote, pristine area like Boxborough, they're testing as high as 80 parts per trillion.
Wow.
Our wells have varied from about, North Acton has varied from about 18, 16, up to about high 60s.
Okay.
It varies. We don't know if it's seasonality or how much you pump the wells. As you pump more, you draw more in from around the well. So we don't know. We do know, we have identified, not for PFAS, we are now trying to identify some potential parcels, let's call them, that have been polluting, and two have been identified on Main Street.
Huh. Now, where does the components of PFAS come from? What products, or what's the source
PFAS,
of
well,
contamination?
first of all, a lot of the PFAS, unfortunately, most of it's no longer manufactured here. As I explained to the select board, a lot of it is actually being imported into this country in products and on products.
From
There's
China?
a company in New Jersey, and the state of New Jersey is fighting it gallantly, that is manufacturing PFAS products for a Belgian company. PFAS is illegal in Belgium. So the company engineers it in Belgium and manufactures it here, and it gets all over. The manufacturing process releases it into the air. Unfortunately, it is in the air now. It's in the soil, and now it's in the water. Products, PFAS, non-stick coatings are made from PFAS products. The packaging in women's makeup is made of PFAS products. Firefighting foam is PFAS. The newer fighting foams are not PFAS.
Okay.
And you might remember I asked the company that's building the solar farm to find another firefighting solution for the solar farm where they store the batteries, because the one that we're using uses PFAS in a pretty sensitive area on the Grace property. And there are companies that make firefighting solutions that don't hurt electronics, that don't use PFAS. But it's in a lot of things. It's in a lot of frozen food packaging, too.
Wow. It also seems like if you're asking for $2 million and the problem is like $6 million.
It's a third, yeah.
Yeah, this, I think you can almost look at taking a long-range view. This could almost be like a tip of the iceberg. And once you find, the more you research it, the more you find the problem is widespread and.
It is widespread. We have tested all our wells. We know what's in all our wells now.
Right.
Part of it right now, straight out, Mike, is in the South Acton plant down toward, down toward where the sewer plant is. We have a South Acton plant that has somewhat similar technologies to North Acton. We have been able to, because the wells are fairly close together, which is what's so strange. Some of the wells there are very low in PFAS, and some of the wells have 12 to 14 parts per trillion, or you can call them nanograms per liter. So the strategy down there has been use the wells that have little or no PFAS to dilute the other wells. Mix the water together, dilute it, then feed it into the plant. The plant itself, we use, those plants, they use something called nanomembrane technologies. They're called, Xenon is the brand. They're nanotechnologies that are very fine, super fine. They actually remove some of the PFAS. They weren't designed to, but they do. And so the PFAS coming out of the South Acton plant meets the state standards. Will they in the future? we don't know, because I don't know what the standards will be in the country, if the country gets them, or what the state of Massachusetts will decide to do. The legislature, we know, has been discussing reducing the amount allowed in water. We don't know if it'll happen, and that's why we piloted something that for the foreseeable future will have 2 types of PFAS removal in series with each other. And that's why it requires another building. These tanks are not little tanks. These are big tanks. You're processing roughly 200, I think that plant's 239 gallons per minute. That we are losing in the town. We don't have. We can't use those 239 gallons. And we were dumping it, hoping it would clear, and we've shut down the whole plant. It just doesn't pay to run it. It's too expensive. We also know that, I don't know if I mentioned it to you general people, once that plant gets built, we have looked at the total cost of ownership. We know it's going to cost the district and ultimately the water takers at least $100,000 a year, incremental to what it costs to run the water through that plant now. And that's because we will have to replace the media and take away what essentially is hazardous waste. And we're not equipped to do that. So we will pay a company to do that for us.
Okay, thank you.
So you're saying that it's effective immediately, no new water hookups, and...
Well, we didn't say immediately.
Okay.
We have to vote on it.
Okay.
The commissioners have to vote on it and notify the Massachusetts DEP and why we're doing it. We already know if we do that, it means it has to include, we can't discriminate.
Sure.
It means businesses, schools, you can't make exceptions if you tell DEP you're going to do that, and they approve it, you have to make it the same for everyone.
And
It's not what we want to do, but if we don't have enough water, we've
Sure.
got to do that to take care of the existing customers and to make sure there's always enough water in the tanks. The tanks are what we use, but the fire department uses to fight the fires. They got to keep them full.
So this is 2 issues that you'll be voting on. One is no new hookups, and the other one is immediate stopping of outdoor water use.
Right, well, that we can postpone to out the next summer.
Right.
We already told DEP we are not going to get down to a rotating 1 day a week per section. You know, it's by sections
Right.
of town now.
Okay. And were there any other items that would be immediate changes to policies that you're voting on? Or is that it, just those 2 items?
That's enough.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not looking to be the bad guys.
No, understood. When do you expect to vote?
We want to supply water to people. That's what we're doing. It's a nonprofit to supply water that turns out the way Acton was organized, we're one of the few towns where it's organized, not anybody's fault here, as 2 municipalities that's supposed to work side by side with each other and interface with each other. It hasn't always worked that way, but that goes back to some history before any of us were here.
Sure. And when do you expect that vote to happen?
I don't know. We want to see what we can do and if there's any other strategies. We've been trying to see if we can intermittently bring that plant online, but it hasn't been working too well.
Okay.
By taking some of the wells that look like they're the bad guys, taking them offline and trying to use a few of the other wells, but monetarily, it doesn't make sense.
Okay. And then I don't want to go too deep in this, but just to make sure for my edification regarding the wells, these aren't a specific well or number of wells in sort of a contained geographic area.
They are.
Oh, it is in a contained
It's these are 5
the
wells
North
called
Acton
the
wells.
Kennedy wells. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They're named the Kennedy wells. They're in North Acton out on 27.
Okay. And so one of my questions was going to be
Yeah, they are in a geographic area.
Whether
That's
it could be-
probably why the PFAS is so high in that area.
Okay. So unfortunately, we don't have anybody we can point a finger at like the Superfund site left by Grace, correct? So there's
no,
not something
we,
like that up there,
We,
at least not currently.
believe me,
but you're
somebody
working
thought
on it.
about that. No,
Okay.
you can't blame it on Grace for that, no.
So there's no suit, it's amazing that the Grace Fund will actually give you $1 million. That's a blessing.
We're using the Grace Fund for this, even though it wasn't its intention. That's why we asked the voters if they would allow it.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Cole?
Thank you. Just perked up my ears pretty heavily on this. So you said you can't discriminate if there are no new hookups. I have two
Yeah,
questions.
the
about-
DEP won't let you. It's
I
either a
understand.
moratorium or it's not.
I do have to have two questions about that.
Yes.
The new twin school, has it already received its water hookup, or would that be subject to?
It has not.
So that would be subject to not getting hooked up?
If the moratorium is in effect, that's correct. It has to be.
Okay, that's the first I've heard of that. Secondly.
Well, moratorium is for everybody.
I understand.
Because you have to claim to the DEP
I understand that.
why, yes.
But the first I've heard of it was 2 Mondays ago at the Select Board. So this is something, I'm also on the Twin School Building Committee, and so I want to get that information to them right away. The second question I have with regard to new hookups, what about a recharacterization? For example, we're talking about revitalizing Route 2A. If we have a retail store that decides to change its mind and become a restaurant, is it already has water? Is that a new hookup, or is it due to
It's to the parcel.
It's the parcel, so a recharacterization of use does not have any impact. It continues.
No. The only thing that comes into effect then is there's a reevaluation of their water use, and the DEP requires a reevaluation because all public in the state, all water districts in the state, water suppliers in the state have to now charge mitigation fees if there is a change in water use.
Okay, so back to the twin school. There is already a water hookup on the parcel for the twin school. Would it be subject to the moratorium, or would it be able to?
I don't know that, Jason. I'm sorry. That I don't know. My guess, if the parcel or the building, if it's to the building, my guess is no. If it's to a new building, I don't know. I would have to go back and ask that one.
Okay.
That
I don't have a lot of hair, but it's all on fire on that topic right now. So please get back to me or more importantly, get back to the Twin School Building Committee on whether or not we have a potential water hookup problem for that building.
Sure.
That goes part and parcel with Mr. Noli's question about when are you taking this vote. Again,
it hasn't voted yet, but I did, if you were at the select board meeting, I explained, that could impact development in Acton if we have to go that route.
That's why I'm grilling you on
Yeah,
that's why I'm
that's
grilling
okay.
you on the topic right now.
Yeah, that's okay.
And then just to put a fine point on what Mr. Wellinghoff was said, I just want to try and make it as
Should have worn my combat helmet, huh?
short as, trust me, I'm being nice. Just to put a fine point on what Mr. Wellinghoff was getting at, every dollar that you receive from ARPA directly and proportionally directly offsets the amount of money that you will eventually have to pass through to the ratepayers. True?
And yes, and try to finance. We have to,
And even
Like the town, we have
finance
to
or
go out
not,
and try to
finance or
finance
not,
it.
you're still passing through the ratepayers eventually. Right.
eventually, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, which is 98.7% of the town. Yeah.
Go ahead.
A bit of fortunate news is, I have your annual report from, that was released this last May, and it says the district holds a $2.1 million stabilization fund which is available to fund water purification and protection of water sources. So it sounds like that would be applicable to this situation, certainly.
I don't want to, is a difficulty in how we're going to be having to allocate money. Probably cannot talk about that. Because we were told by the state, we have to do certain things to take care of the central Acton. Both the plant and the 2 wells that we drilled, and we're going to have to come up with money to purchase Acton land. Acton land is not inexpensive, and we have no choice. The state has told us they want more protection around the wells, and that means a substantial land purchase. Or they won't or you have wells you can't get permitted, and the idea of drilling a well is get it permitted, but the state comes up with the conditions.
And this is all under executive?
We're negotiating, trying to negotiate, and that came up at our last meeting. We had to go into, the attorney told us we had to discuss this in executive session.
Understood.
But we may be tapping different places to quickly obtain the land so that we can bring a well that's close to ready, we believe, get it up to where they'll allow us to further test it and connect it to a plant that's being built.
Ms. Gangali?
Thank you. I'm wondering if other towns in our state have had similar problems, and if so, how have they dealt with it? Surely this is not unique to our town.
It's not. We're a little ahead of the curve because when we heard about it, we elected to begin testing our water, for example, a year and a half ahead of Concord. It doesn't mean that they're going to find their water is absolutely great. But yes, other places. I've been in contact with the Cape, and what they've done there is they have kind of a unique, they have a lot of PFAS. They know what their source is. It's from the military base. So they've tracked that. So they may be getting some help there. But since the Cape is a seasonal area, they found, and they're only taking care of short term, they're going to put a bunch of tanks outdoors because it's warm when they need it. So they'll put their tanks outdoors and they'll just run it through activated charcoal, and they feel that'll be enough, at least for the immediate future. They'll build a hut around one of the tanks because they have some people that stay on the Cape all year. So they'll heat one of those tanks. But they have the same problem. They're going to put about 6, but they know the cause. They know who did it because of the firefighting foams that were used extensively down there. Other towns, Hudson, we know they are, in fact, the PFAS committee, which I guess you know consists of the assistant town manager, the town of Acton sustainability manager, one commissioner, the district manager, and the environmental compliance manager are going to make a field trip into Hudson to see how they're handling it. Hudson, Massachusetts, I mean. Mm-hmm. They have a problem, probably not as severe as ours, we don't think, but we made contact with Hudson, and they invited us to send our team, town and water district together, to go visit the Hudson plant and to discuss with them how they're addressing it short-term and long-term. We understand they've chosen, I can't make a judgment on it, they've chosen to do something called ion exchange. Mm-hmm. We want to examine that. We in Acton have chosen something somewhat different. We have chosen something called ion exchange coupled with GAC, granular activated charcoal, mm-hmm. in series, because we don't want to just take care of it for this year or the next year. We don't know when, but we're quite certain the state will be more stringent in the future. So we don't want to go through this again, because every iteration is more and more expensive. So we're hoping that our solution will be a better solution that'll carry us further, but we owe it to make sure that we're not, we want to get some input from another town, what their experience is and why they're going one way, and Hudson has agreed to cooperate with us so far. Now, are there other towns that have run into this problem? Yeah, there are a couple around us, but Harvard has it, Boxborough has it, but they don't have public water suppliers in their towns. They have essentially individual wells at the homes, except for a little area of Harvard that's got a small private public water supplier, just like the apartments here at Strawberry Hill. They have a private public water supplier who I suspect maybe can't deliver the pure water they need, and the expense is so phenomenal, they've decided to ask Acton to hook them up.
That's helpful. One other follow-up question I had was, so if I understand it correctly, you don't understand what the source of the PFAS is in Acton?
No, we don't. One of the problems that not Acton, many towns have, Acton has, well, we have our, quote, our own aquifer, people consider it their own aquifer, our water comes from different places. And it kind of oozes in, infiltrates into Acton from various places. It's not just a, and it would be nice if there was a border and the water was just from Acton, but it's not.
Yeah, I understand that. That wasn't my question, really.
Yeah,
So-
we don't have a source. We know there's got to be something in North Acton.
Right, so we can't.
That was probably before our time that put it into the soil.
Right.
Don't know what.
So we can't isolate the source, and there seems to be tremendous amount of variability across time of
Yes.
the PFAS levels. So my question is, even putting the solution in place, what is the probability of the solution being adequate going forward? In other words, if those levels were to go up 200, 300% of what they are today, would that be adequate, or would it at that point no longer serve its
They
purpose?
probably would continue to work, because they worked very well when we finally adjusted it. The testing company called Blue Leaf finally got it adjusted. And by the way, the solution depends very much on the quality of water you're feeding into it. Once they got it to work, they could get the levels very low, and eventually they got it to what they called ND non-detect levels. As the state pointed out to us after they reviewed the test results, which almost stands to reason, the more junk that's in the water, the more often you're going to have to change the media, which stands to reason. Right now, they've estimated, unless we make some additional changes, which some we are going to make because the state wants us to make them, they're estimating our media will last us 180 days, after which we will pay. We're going to go with a company called Calgon, the same Calgon that you hear their ads for. It's Calgon. We're going to buy their activated charcoal, which we already use at the West Acton facility, which only goes through activated charcoal, and the PFAS coming out of those wells up there is non-detectable. So that's, for the time being, great. For the other wells, once it goes through both of these, it becomes that, but the more junk in, the more often we'll have to change the carbon filters, and possibly the IX filters will last a little longer, but the carbon filters, the 42 tanks of 20,000 pounds each, 180 days, they said, is what you should expect. And that's built into the incremental, that's part of the incremental $100,000 a year, in addition to what costs you to operate the plant. We also factored in a little more electricity because we're going to have to put in 2 more water pumps. So once stuff goes through the nano filters, we call the xenon filters, we will have to pump it into the other building and run it through the additional filters, then let it settle, then pump it out to us so we can drink it. Okay, sure.
Mr. Noon?
Thank you. So what's the water supply in gallons per day? That's
In Acton?
Yeah.
We, depends, it varies.
Okay, an average
But
day.
1 well, the max we're allowed to do now by the state, we're allowed to pump 1.9596 gallons a day average, which includes the
So we're
summer,
talking
a million, I'm sorry.
2 million gallons a day?
Million.
2 million gallons a day.
1.96 million per day is the maximum we're allowed to do on average, which includes everything.
And how much of that theoretically comes from these North Acton wells?
Well, I'd have this, let's see, about 200 gallons, 196 gallons a minute roughly, so 200 gallons a minute, probably a little over 500,000 gallons a day probably.
Okay, so 25%. Is there another source of that kind of water? MWRA, another town?
Yeah, MWRA, we looked at that, and it's still being looked at and relooked at. We also have a committee called the Hvac, Town Committee, that's
I've
looking
heard
at
of
the future growth, and
Yeah.
they're a little scared that the future growth won't be supported by what we're allowed to pump, or what our capacity is. MWRA is a possibility. I had looked at that before I was a commissioner, while I was on something called the Waterland Management Committee, and it's not cheap to hook up.
Well, we're not talking about anything cheap, Barry.
It ain't cheap to hook up, and it ain't cheap to buy their water either. But is that a possibility in the future? We may have to tap into them? Yes, and that's going to be examined again by the PFAS committee, which includes, as I said, 2 people from the town and 3 people from the water district. And they're going to relook at that, and they will probably sit down and talk to us about it and ask if they want us to look at it once again.
Is there another, since you're talking about buying land?
We also, by the way, looked at connecting as a possibility, assuming Concord would let us run a pipe through Concord.
We'll run a pipe through Acton. I mean,
Well, to connect to Bedford.
Okay.
Bedford has MWRA water. And I approached Bedford about that possibility a while ago. And Bedford said, yeah, we'd love to help you out, assuming Concord lets you run a pipe down Concord into Bedford. I can't tell you how that would go.
Yeah. Like I said,
And
they have a
Bedford
pipe
said,
through Acton.
Bedford said, we don't have the capacity to give it to you because they get their MWRA water from Lexington.
Okay.
So that,
I'm
trying to be creative and think of things, so I'm trying it. I tried them.
Going to put you to the test. Is there any other site in Acton where you think you could drill wells to get 500,000 gallons a day?
Not 500,000 gallons, but there is a site that we think we can get a little more water. I wrote a letter. Well, number one, it takes many years to develop a well. I would say you're talking 6 years to do it with the regulations. The well is in an area that a 40B has been proposed. I wrote a letter signed by all the commissioners to the ACHC that wants to develop the parcel, and asked them to reconsider, because should we want that well in the future or now, if this land gets developed, we felt it would no longer be suitable for Acton or the town. So we don't know how that's going to go.
I'm going to assume the site's not in North Acton, so.
No, we don't think North Acton's a particularly good area anymore.
So,
There was industry there, I was told. I wasn't living here at the time, but I was told there was some kind of industry in that area many years ago, but I haven't been here 70 years, so I don't know what was there.
Any chance, given this need, we can pull water out of Nagog Pond?
I think little to none. But that is not up to the water district. We were not allowed, the court forbade us to respond to Concord. They said the only respondent could be the town of Acton. So that's Nina's bailiwick.
We could,
The reason is
we could certainly ask the town to respond.
Yeah, that's Nina's bailiwick. The reason they gave is the Acton Water District did not, this is what Concord claimed, and the court went along with them. The short answer is the Acton Water District did not exist. The town of Acton did exist at the time the legislature granted Concord the rights to Nagog Pond. Therefore, it's between Acton, Littleton, and Concord. The Acton Water District, you can't come to court anymore. Our attorney did go to court, and she listened, but she can't speak.
All right, so just throwing out theoreticals, if I may.
Yeah,
Chairman.
sure.
So the voters vote to sell the Acton Water District to the town of Acton for $1. And the town of Acton goes to court to press its claim from the, 1884.
Yeah, something like that. It was.
Could that happen? And is there?
Well, the town of Acton right now can go to court and say, we want that water. They could. I think they said we want a piece of it.
Well, yeah, you can't have it all.
And I think the court basically said something like, well, it's really a Water Management Act issue now, and you got anything to say? Acton, go talk to the Massachusetts DEP, because they're the administrators of the Water Management Act. We can't.
Okay, I hear you, Barry.
You can.
Somebody
Steve,
can.
I guess.
Maybe somebody ought to. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Ms. Anderson?
Hi, thank you for coming.
You're very welcome.
It sounds like this issue has come up in some of the other pumping stations, but the current filtering technology in those has been sufficient so far.
Well, yeah, yes, it has come up in, actually, it's come up in everywhere in the town. We test all the wells. What we call West Acton, where the Acton Water District headquarters building is, there are 2 wells there, one on each side of 111. They are pumped through because they didn't have to do it PFAS, because there's some organic color in the water caused by mostly dead leaves seeping down into the water. That's the way it is. People don't like that color. I don't like, my wife doesn't like that color. So we run all that water through a tank, a single tank of granular activated charcoal. And it turns out that also has the capability of removing PFAS to the non-detectable level. So essentially, those 2 wells are putting out clean water, not that they won't be treated for other things in the future, but they're putting out clean water that can be pumped right into the system with no PFAS in the water.
So the reason you're looking at this different technology for the North Acton plant, because you're saying that's using the granulated activated charcoal, you're talking about more for this plant in part to future.
And if we're looking, we don't want to have to go back again and say, oh, we got to spend another $6 million. We want to put the building up, put the pumps in that you have to put in to deal with both the granulated activated charcoal and ion exchange.
Okay.
Which we believe will take care of the foreseeable future, even if the state or the federal government lower the acceptable levels of PFAS. Or add, instead of PFAS 6, they make it PFAS 8, which means you have a tougher time staying below 20, because now you're measuring for 6 compounds instead of 6 versus the 8 they might add, or 10, or whatever the number is.
Yeah.
So that's why we're adding ion exchange. We want to get it down to non-detect and keep it there even if the standard changes.
I'm just trying to think of what would be coming up. Will other plants need to be upgraded relatively soon to meet the current standards?
That's a good question. And the short answer is that currently the South Acton plant is doing okay without any additional treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And will we have to change it at some point? If the standard gets dropped to 10, that plant might not make it. But right now, we're using dilution to get it low. And that's why we're trying to get another well that, unbelievably, it's on the Grace property. It may have other crap in it, but it has very little PFAS in it. But we know how to take the other crap out of it. Short answer.
Now,
And we got the technology to take it out already in the plant. So yes, that's what those giant towers are you see outside some of them, some of the plants.
Mm-hmm.
All the water that we pump into the system, we blow it way up into the air and aerate it, and then it comes down over essentially lots of little golf balls that pump more air into it, and it evaporates all of the organic carbons that are in there, which is what was put in there, the 1,4-dioxane, it blows it out. And
now,
then we have fans that suck it up, by the way.
with these, the North Acton wells offline, what sort of stress are we putting on the other wells? My understanding is that you can
We are
run a well
running the other
dry.
wells harder. We have to.
But do we have to be concerned about long-term stress on the aquifer in those areas?
On the aquifer, no, we are not over-pumping the aquifer. We do have you can overstress wells, and we're pretty careful, I shouldn't say we, the operators who do operate the wells, they're all highly trained people. They know we have to rotate the wells. For example, we will not pump the West Acton wells days and days and days without rest. We'll shut them down and we'll move it to other. You can't pump all your wells all the time. You can't. That's how you kill wells. Eventually you'll pump it so much that, which has already happened to wells, and we've had to re-drill them, you start sucking junk into the wells, and literally they call it clogging. The well clogs up. And you've got to re-drill and go through the state, because you have to re-drill, you got to re-permit, you got to do all that again. So we rotate the wells, so we give the wells resting time. And we're pretty careful about it. Acton probably per capita probably has more wells than I would say any other community that I know of. We've got 22, well, hopefully soon 23 active wells, which if you think about it, it tells you none of the wells in Acton are particularly productive wells, which turns out is the case. The early settlers thought, we had an abundant water supply. You do have a lot of water, but not that much that you can pump it up real quickly. You don't. We don't have wells like some places like Littleton can run on two of their 3 wells. They can supply most of the town pretty nicely. They run 3 out of 4 wells, they're happy, and that's all they need. We have to run a lot of our wells a lot of time, but we have to rotate them and give them rest. Our wells are what we call sand and gravel or shallow wells. The only well we have, the first one we ever tried, is the ones across the street, the Central Acton Center, we call it Central Acton wells. Those wells are 500 feet deep versus the other wells that are 30 to 45 feet deep. So it's a big difference. Those are all the way through the bedrock, which Acton's got lots of, you live here. We've got lots of rocks. We've got lots of bedrock. All right, so those are drilled below 500 feet versus the top layer, sand and gravel, which is what all the other wells are, sand and gravel here. I don't know if that helped, I hope.
How much has water usage changed with the work from home trend since COVID?
With COVID?
Yeah, with people working from home?
Actually, the the pumping actually went down because we've asked people to conserve, and I think Most people did that. We were very, very lucky and surprised this summer that even though we allowed 1 day a week, we're finding, except for some pockets that we know don't care, most people not only observed it, but they didn't need to use it because we had a particularly moist summer. This was one of those thank you years that we just lucked out. It was a good year. So the amount of pumping went down, which was good because we didn't lose water pressure, which is caused by not having those tanks filled. The water pressure in Acton is caused by having water in your tanks. That's where our pressure comes from. It's not from lots of pumps in the street. That's not how Acton operates. We fill the towers, except for one tower, they're all quite a ways above ground on hills and stuff. And we were able to keep the tanks pretty filled because we didn't have to supply a lot of water for irrigation this year. So the actual amount, thank goodness, went down, and we were able to squeak through the summer pretty much intact with a little less watering, but pretty much intact.
Now, this is clearly a long-term issue for Acton in general, especially if it keeps
It's a
growing.
forever issue. Unfortunately, as you might know, PFAS degrades very, very slowly. It does degrade, but it's very slow. It's been nicknamed a forever chemical. And unfortunately, it does collect in animals, and it is excreted by the kidneys, but very slowly. I mean, we're talking years. That's why there's still substantial, I wouldn't call it controversy, discussion about how harmful PFAS really is. And I can't answer that either because I don't know what the real answer is to that. But the state thinks it's something we shouldn't have a lot of it in the water supply. And that's why it's measured at such very low quantities.
So there's, we're talking about trying to increase the water supply. Are there any efforts to increase things like gray water usage? I know that the new Twin School building is using that. Is that a direction of?
Well, we're trying to conserve water as much as we can.
Yeah.
We have, we send our environmental compliance manager into the schools on a regular basis to talk to the students who are actually pretty sensitive. And the message is, try to get the water use down as much as you can and conserve it so we don't have to pump as much. I can't remember, was it Consumer Reports? Someone said water is now going to be the new oil.
Yeah. But as a homeowner, I have not received any information about how to reduce my water usage apart from sort of the standard, get a low-flow toilet, don't run the water while you brush your teeth.
We do give rebates for things like that. We give rebates for efficient washing machines.
It personally drives me nuts that I flush my toilet with drinking water. So any sort of help towards getting gray water systems would be.
That's something I would love to talk to the town about. If you live in Sudbury and you're building a house, you will have to have 2 hookups to your house. One for potable water and one if you decide you're going to irrigate. You will not use potable water for your irrigation, outdoor irrigation. Is that the best solution? I don't know. It's been discussed. I'm not sure, to tell you the truth, how people would react to it here. Obviously, it would have to be grandfathered because I would say most of the construction in Acton, including where I live, my home, when I turn the tap on outside to hook up a hose to wash my car, it's the same water that I would drink.
Oh, yeah. But we are moving towards increasing capacity effectively, not promoting programs to decrease usage at this time.
We've tried to decrease usage, and it has worked in Acton. We have decreased our usage from an average of 75 gallons per day per capita to 65 gallons per day per capita, which is pretty significant. Yeah. That's pretty significant, especially when the average across the U.S. is substantially higher. And the average across the Commonwealth used to be higher. The DEP is trying to get all water systems to get it down to where Acton has gotten by itself, without any forcible use, just trying to get people to try using rain barrels, which we used to give it, now we sell them at cost. We'll give you a rebate on a low-flow washer. We'll, I can't remember what the other rebates are, but there are rebates for water-saving devices. And now with the new metering systems, you can find out what you don't have to wait a whole quarter. You can find out what you're doing each month if you just call the district and they'll tell you what you're reading. Because we look at, in fact, one of the things we're also doing is we're trying to plug leaks in people's homes and out in pipes, because we look at what you're using over a month and we say, oh, you had a jump, and we'll call you, or we tend to call, we don't use email that much yet. We call you and just tell you, you had a spike. You got a leak, possibly, and in most cases it's people's toilets that are running, and you don't hear it all the time. So we're trying that, but we also put tips on our website for how you can save water outdoors. It's on the website. Should we do mailings? We're trying to cut back on mailings because they've gotten pretty expensive.
But it sounds like you all are doing as much as can be done to minimize usage.
We probably could always do more, but we're sending Matt into the schools. I would say he's in the schools monthly.
But the answer here really is that this station needs to be upgraded. That it's not that we can decrease usage and depend on the other ones.
We can't write off. It is it's no longer the newest. The one across the street that's being built will be the newest. But it's got much simpler technology because it turns out it's dealing with the covenant wells are too high in the manganese. So we're going to basically remove the manganese, and then the water should be pretty good. And of course, add chlorine and stuff, and the water should be pretty good quality. It looks like we'll be able to manage PFAS again in that well without anything crazy.
Yeah. So,
however, we don't know the future. We don't know the future standards, but we can't survive without having either a new water source from someplace or getting North Acton running more than just intermittently. It's a non-starter.
but this is an expense that the townspeople have to pay, whether it comes out of ARPA. It would be, if you weren't separate from, literally separate from the town.
We look at it as part of the town.
Yeah.
It's a town problem. Yes, there are a few people in the town don't get water from us, but it's 98.7 something percent.
The taxpayers pay for this. It's just in the form of a different bill.
You're absolutely right. It is.
So this should be viewed in the greater taxpayer base. All right, thank you. That's it for me.
Okay.
I think that wraps that up, with the exception of, I'm curious, will you be presenting again to any of the committees in the town of Acton in the near future on this subject?
On PFAS itself?
Yeah, or on this, on the need,
Oh,
on the ask for
on
the ARPA,
this.
or, yeah.
I wasn't planning to. I wasn't planning until things came to a head at one of our meetings of even discussing ARPA with the town, until we realized we can't live without that plant.
Okay.
It's costing the town too much water, and we're beating the crap out of our other wells, trying to make it up, and we shouldn't be doing it.
I'm curious how critical this is in terms of, and I'm not trying to scare anybody or create a panic, but
Yeah.
can you put a criticality number on this if you're
On
not able
PFAS?
to, well, if you're not able to build this mitigation process, what does it mean for the water users of Acton? Are we all going to
The water
have
users
to
of
buy bottled
Acton
water?
will have water. Will it be more and more restricted? It has to be, because the town has already planned growth. The town is hoping for Powder Mill Place, you know of which I'm speaking?
Yes.
To come online, and I worked on that with the previous developer extensively. Before I was a commissioner, I was on another committee. And worked with him and his lawyer, who was Levine at the time. I don't know who their lawyer is now. I sat down with Levine and the developer, and we worked cooperatively to reduce the water use there, and also to have them not irrigate with a lot of water. He was going to collect all the water from the runoff of his parking lots, the roof, everything, because we knew water was going to be critical. Now, what does it mean if we don't have that plant? It means we now have a fixed amount of water. As it gets toward the summer, things get more critical because people don't want their lawns brown. This was a good year. I don't know what next summer will be, but we may have to say no outdoor irrigation at all, no drying, no washing the car. And if we think it's getting critical, if the town does in fact grow and Powder Mill Place starts to come online, I don't know when, but it wasn't something that I brought up. It wasn't my idea. We looked at, will we have to just say we have to stop water hookups for some period of time until we find another way of increasing the water supply to the existing customers, which is number one.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And ladies. I'm sorry, I meant guys generically.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a favor of the chair of the select board?
Yes.
Mr. Martin, are you expecting to call Mr. Rosen before your board again before the October 18th deadline, or do you have the information you need to make a recommendation on the $2 million request from the Acton Water District?
No, we were not. We have the information we need, we think.
Thank you.
So at this time, I think we can move down the agenda to our ARPA discussion, and I'd like to turn that over to Jason, and after the ARPA discussion, we'll turn it over to Mike Majors for a POV discussion. So go ahead, Jason.
Thank you very much. So I did send out a blank spreadsheet to everyone at the committee. I'm hoping that you all have had a chance to run down the list and give your grade on each column. And I'm quite sure that every single one of us came in with less than $7 million worth of ask in our P1. Am I right?
Yes. Well, now it's
Yeah.
reduced to 5.
Okay. So the reason why I sent out that spreadsheet was because I wanted to try and help direct the recommendations that we're going to give to the select board. And so, as you can see from my columns, I tried to keep it sort of the important, we got to do this. If we have any leftover money, great, that's a nice to have. And then lastly, not recommended. Because if you'll notice, we are at least 2-to-1 oversubscribed from the ask versus the resources that we have. And yes, we already cleaved off $400,000 of it to go to the local receipts revenue shortfall from last year. I have a sneaking suspicion that a substantial amount of money is going to go to the Acton Water District, but obviously I'm not, I could be overruled on that one. So I don't know how the committee wants to handle this. I did speak on my own behalf at the last select board meeting, and I'm going to steal Mike Major's thunder here. Just quickly go through the recommendations that I made, and I would like to get a sense from the rest of the committee if you think that these recommendations are correct. And also I'd like to get a sense of the committee if you want to go down this list of 43, now 45 items and potentially sort of pick the low-hanging fruit that we really, really like versus the stuff that, yeah, maybe we'll get to it if we get to it. So the recommendations that I said, which I hoped was a summation of our last meeting, but again, I don't want to put words in everyone's mouth, that's why I spoke on my own behalf. I thought our first priority was to backfill anything that was clearly identified as a COVID shortfall from the year before. So anything where we could prove lost revenue and any direct COVID costs that were already absorbed. And I can call out the priority items by name on the list if that would be helpful. The second recommendation I have is that we should be investing in programs or projects or whatever I want to call it that were already clearly identified in our existing capital improvement plans. And that I also did not want us to fund any net new initiative that would have ongoing costs, because I do consider this to be the epitome of one-time monies. God willing, this is the only time we go through such a pandemic. God willing, this is the only time we have to have such extraordinary monies coming from the federal government for this. So just by way of quickly saying it, the items that I thought were clearly proven lost revenue or direct COVID costs already absorbed were P1, P4, P26, P37, and those are the ones that I thought were explicitly just straight up backfill, which in my mind are kind of the lowest hanging fruit and the most likely to be, yes, we should put our money into this right from the start. Obviously, I'm willing to be overruled. I'd like to spark a conversation on that topic. I can share with the group now that we've had a meeting, I will share with you my spreadsheet. I came up with 6.07 million that I thought was P1. I've got some P2s that are more than $1 million, which causes issues because now I'm out of money. And then I did identify, 40% of the ask, I basically, in my personal opinion, threw out as not recommended right from the start. So if I could just have a quick head nod or show of hands, do we want to go down this list line item by line item?
I do not.
I got one yes, two yeses, two no's. I got an eh. Okay, I don't have enough yeses to do this.
Why not just start with the high dollar items? That would be
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do it in that order. So there are only $2 million items on this list. The first of which is, since we just talked about it, we'll take it out of chronological order. $2 million for PFAS mitigation. What do we think? Is this something that, what I like about this is that it meets the requirement of money for the most amount of people, most amount of good. It qualifies in my mind as long-term investment. It also qualifies in my mind as health and safety. So from that category, from that perspective, I think this is probably something we should invest in. Whether or not we need to do the full $2 million, I'm not sure of. I'm also not sure why he didn't ask for all $6 million, because it sounds like it's something we really need. So, Roland?
I agree. Also curious where they have 2.1 million in I want to say set aside a stabilization fund, that maybe some of that money should come out of that. Maybe we don't fund it at 2 million, maybe we do 1.5.
Okay.
Or something like that. It's a need, it's a problem. It's not going to go away. We're not the only community in the state that's dealing with this. There's a lot of other ones, and he's only talked about a few, right? So I agree. It provides the most bang across, because we all have to drink the water, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely the most common thing. Does anybody want to speak in opposition to this money for the water district?
I'm more in line with a smaller amount, and just real quickly, just a little bit of context is the water district currently has $14.2 million of debt outstanding. The central Acton water treatment plant will be $12.9 million that will be borrowed, and so again, just some context, but that's $27 million of borrowing that the water district will have to spread among its users. And this, we would be talking about, probably the difference between 2, 4, or 6 million in addition to that. So just some context. I thought you brought up a really interesting point, which is how are other towns dealing with this? And the annual report outlined that, and as he said, the town is taking an earlier, more proactive look at this. Now, the point, though, is that if it is a huge deal and every township in the state has an issue with it, the state will need to subsidize towns galore, and if we already remediate the issue, they're certainly not going to backfill us money, my guess. Just food for thought. But I'm more in line with just a smaller amount of money. I mean, $1 million, $1.5 million. I mean, I agree, water users are generally town residents and taxpayers, but it's not a specific one-to-one situation, so.
Well, first I was going to say that since I'm on the board of an entity that's requesting money, I want to generally recuse myself from these discussions. However, on this one, yeah, I'm in favor of giving money to the water district, but I would like to see a better piece of financial analysis. You know, what's the, you know, what will it cost the ratepayers for that other $2 million for the next 20 years, as opposed to what can we do with this money right now?
Fair enough.
Because, you know, if we're talking rescue, you know, rescues don't, the lifeguard doesn't take 20 years to rescue the drowning swimmer, nor does he do a study about how he's going to do it. He just acts. So my bias is to say, well, how can we spend this money that has the biggest impact right now and not over the next 20 years? However, that's all I'm going to say, because if I say any more.
Fair enough. I think I will be following up with Mr. Rosen on the hookup for the Boardwalk School, Boardwalk campus, so I will definitely follow up with him and ask for a more clear, you know, monetary breakdown to see what we can do with that. And I will send the results to the wider committee. The next $2 million,
I am hesitant to cut back too much on the money they're asking for, given that this is all taxpayer money. Effectively, this would be part of our tax bill otherwise. And he implied that there were forthcoming expenses that couldn't be discussed with us. So while they have a stabilization fund, it might already effectively be allocated for other things. We are doing a quick back of the envelope look, that's mixing metaphors, at their financials and trying to make an assumption about how much the water district can afford to bear the brunt of this. And while it's a lot of money, since it affects everyone, I'm pretty willing to take their recommendation on the $2 million and not second guess that number personally.
I think I'd like to come back with, this is what the $2 million would be right now. This is what $2 million ameliorated over a 20-year loan would be. Are we willing to do that instead?
Another interesting point along the lines of equity in all of this is current debt is paid for the same by every single household. We all get charged $60 per quarter.
Some of us get charged twice because we have 2 water hookups.
And I noticed that. So we're not, it doesn't matter how much water you use. It doesn't matter the size of your unit or your income. You're going to be paying the same amount. Just something to keep in mind as we think about socioeconomic equity.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question debt costs you more in the long run than cash today. And I think the purpose of the ARPA funds is to really fill critical, immediate needs. And I just, looking at the list, I cannot think of a single item on the list that is more critical, more important, and more needy of immediate mitigation than this water issue. If it were my zoo to run, I'd probably give them all $6 million. That's my opinion.
Okay. I think we spend a lot of time on the water. I'm going to move on to the next $2 million entity, which is a sewer hookup, sewer extension specifically for the new AHA/Kennedy property. This is the one where we're crossing the street. I believe I've been potentially rudely clear on my opinion of sewers in the past, so I will try not to speak too much on this. I have this, for example, in my 3 not recommended list at all. I thought this was the easiest $2 million to take off the table to free up some of these ARPA resources for some of these other projects. Is there anyone who absolutely wants to advocate for spending $2 million to hook up the AHA house when they already have a plan to have their own septic system? Mr. Majors.
Well, I'm not voting in support of that. It's just the opposite. agree with you, but for different reasons. AHA Senior Housing has put the septic in their design, and I understand there are complications with what that structure would look like, but I'm dead set against spending $2 million to add a sewer to that site, where, if we did that 2 or 3 years ago, you wouldn't see the project that you would see there today, the dog park and the AHL, it wouldn't be there. It would be something tax revenue producing commercial enterprise or some kind of other development. But those $2 million, I think, will be better spent giving it to the water district or using it for sewer study or for Great Road, if they're talking about sewers.
Anybody want to defend $2 million for sewer AHA? I'm not, yes?
I don't want to defend it, but at the select board meeting, there was a question of having the AHA speak to them. I'm hoping I could ask Mr. Martin if that is something that will be happening.
Mr. Martin, would you care to speak to this?
Will the AHA speaking to you about whether they are interested in having the sewer system?
Not to the board itself,
Okay.
Possibly to the manager.
So we don't have any.
I don't have any information.
Do you have any information about whether this would change their funding sources? My understanding is that they have the current septic system in their design and in their budget. This would be presumably removing that from their budget and being effectively paid for by the town, putting the sewer in. Is that the case?
Yes, but
Do you know?
it's not an overwhelming expense, right? It's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars for the septic system, but not.
Nowhere near $2 million.
Nowhere near $2 million, and not.
So this wouldn't be a big savings for them?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So while we're not taking official votes or anything, I would like to put a bug in Mr. Martin's ear as he goes back to talk to the select board that there's not a ton of support for the $2 million for the sewer for AHA from this committee. The next largest single ticket item on here is $1 million for the Asa Parlin House as a cultural center. And I absolutely have been loud and bombastic about this, so I'm going to immediately stop talking and see if anyone else would like to speak to Asa Parlin House. Yes, Mr. Borden.
I think when you have this kind of money that we can do a lot of other things, $1 million on that is a waste of money. You could tear that house down, build a replica of it, have it all open, and the inside is a meeting space for a heck of a lot less than $1 million. Now, personally, I think that house should have been torn down in the beginning when they built this whole complex. And it's been an eyesore in the town for years. It looks better than what it did, but it's still an eyesore. It's still falling down. It would have been better to park all the town vehicles there instead of taking up all the parking spaces around Town Hall for citizens to use when they come to meetings. So I am not in favor of this project at all in any way, shape, or form.
I firmly believe that the space on Audubon Hill is also potentially viable as a cultural center. I don't believe that the Asa Parlin House is the only spot in town where a cultural center could go. So does anybody want to speak to, does anyone affirm love of the Asa Parlin House and the historical nature of the 1970s add-on that wants to defend the Asa Parlin House $1 million?
No, it just looks like a good money after bad, bad money after good situation.
Thank you. I didn't say that last bit into the microphone, which is perhaps just as well. Mr. Majors.
Yes, my 2 cents is, once again, ironically, I agree with you. In that, I think we do need conference space, meeting space, but Asa Parlin may fill that need. However, I don't think we ever bought into the concept that it should be used for a cultural center. And you're restoring it as a meeting space open to committees and the public, and for whatever reason, I would support, only because we need space. it doesn't have to be that space, but if that's in a plan, fine. But I don't think we ever agreed that it should also be a cultural center.
Thank you.
As a lover of historic houses and an owner of one, I can tell you, I do a lot of things to avoid having to bring parts of the building up to code, because there literally isn't space in it for some of the staircases to become less steep and other things. The idea of taking that old building, now, Roland, have you been in it? I have a hard time believing that there are any actually important architectural details inside, not just some open wooden beams.
Steve Noon and I toured that building, how many years ago, Steve?
Maybe 10.
Maybe 10. The foundation was leaking, there was water in it, it was a mess.
Oh, yeah, but that's what
And
happens.
there's not, you look at it on the inside, and I don't see anything that's worth, myself personally, is worth saving. I mean, Dean Charter said years ago, you can tear the place down, build a replica of it, it's all open on the inside, and you can do it for a heck of a lot less money.
That's what
And
I'm
I believe
concerned,
it's
given,
not $1 million.
given the $100,000 it took to make the ADA bathroom here. I'm concerned that for what we could get for the cost of making that building usable and
Too much money.
compliant for everyone, we could get so much more for the money creating the cultural center somewhere else.
I would also argue that this is
Exactly.
not anything remotely related to a COVID mitigation concept. Mr. Noon?
Oh, just to embellish Roland's story, we were in the basement. I leaned on the post that supported the beam. The post moved several inches. We don't know, because Roland and I got out of there as fast as two humans could possibly climb a steep stairway.
Okay.
I would say,
And
knowing
Steve was
a
ahead of
little
me
bit
being the
about
elder.
wood and woodwork that I know, and just looking at that building from the outside, I can imagine that it would take quite a lot of chemicals, perhaps PFAS being one of them, just to save the wood that's in the building if you were trying to restore it. I mean, like you say, much cheaper to just tear the thing down and build a
So,
replica.
if I could sum up, I don't see a ton of support on this committee for the Asa Parlin House, $1 million. The next largest ticket item on here, and we won't go through all these, but let's at least get through the largest of them. Almost $600,000 for the telephone system upgrade at all of the schools in town. This is hand in hand with two of the schools in town having been torn down and therefore needing new telephone systems, and the one other of the elementary schools having a failing telephone system. This is not part of the school SIP, so it doesn't meet my second criteria of being already identified, but this is something that is clear and present and is the type of project that will be in use for years to come. So it's not just a one and done type thing. This is a many-year investment. So I have this in my spreadsheet as a yes, number one important category. Mr. Borden.
I don't know how many of you on the committee got the multiple ways of contact from the school last Wednesday, when a tree branch took down the power lines going in and knocked out their phone system. We can't get any incoming, we can only make outgoing. So that tells me that it is definitely antiquated and in dire need of an upgrade. And that's vitally important when a situation may occur at one of the schools. And I think that is something that is money well spent.
Anyone want to speak against $600,000 for a phone revamp at the new schools? Yes.
Yeah, I got the call at 11:33 about my child having been released at 11:30.
Yeah.
From the system. That said, in the list of things that's necessary, I really think this could be rolled into the school budget. This should be already handled with the school SIP. There are things on here directly related to COVID and COVID treatment as part of the school's requests that I support fairly heartily. But this does not fall under that umbrella for me.
Okay.
Yeah, similar thoughts is in line with that is, if this is part of the school SIP, you know, it doesn't sound like it is.
It was not part of the
One
SIP.
question is why not, is like, what sort of urgency or priority level is it for the school?
I think it got reprioritized when the Blanchard school system failed, flat out failed. So I think it got reprioritized as a result of that. So that's, I'm hearing mixed on that one, but I would personally advocate for it. Let's see, let's move on now to a couple of $510,000 items. P33 and P34. Originally, I had these as not recommended because I was convinced that this was going to have ongoing costs. But I just had a conversation today, and it was explained to me that these are indeed fenced programs. These are 3-year programs to specifically sort of set a floor, an income floor, and anyone that was below that floor would be offset. Their tuition would be offset, not to exceed the amount of money that's in the grant. So my initial reason for, and this is nuanced, my initial reason for being against this is I did not want to fund ongoing projects, new initiative ongoing projects out of these funds. But it turns out that this is indeed a specific short-term project coming out of what was already planned before COVID hit. So I'm more open to these, but they're not in my absolute has to happen list. What's everyone's thought on these two? I'd like to take them as a bundle because they're $1 million.
So I think it falls under a couple of things that the program was supposed to support. So in terms of social equity, I think that was one of the categories. It definitely supports that. And particularly the group that has been hardest hit by COVID would probably need these resources. So I'm in support of it.
Okay, next $500,000 item is HVAC and public facilities. I have this as a 1 in my spreadsheet because this definitely qualifies as long-term capital investment and has been identified as part of the SIP. So it is something that we're going to do anyway, and will have return on investment for years to come. So therefore, I think this is something that we should actively consider funding. Would anyone care to quarrel with me on that one?
No.
Great. I'm sorry, I skipped a $600,000 one. Fort Pond Brook and River Street Dam. This falls in the category of, God, I wish we didn't have to do this. But the reality of the situation is we do have to do this. It is a known, clear, and present problem. If we don't do it in ARPA money, we're going to do it elsewhere. So I kind of like the fact that this has found money, and this is a retirement of risk right from the start. Yeah. I really wish we didn't find ourselves in this situation, but I consider this $600,000 to be fungible money. We either take it here or we find it elsewhere. Mr. Borden.
I thought that the state was going to give us some money towards the dam mitigation.
I think they did.
Not 60 grand or something.
60 grand's better than nothing. I don't know if Mr. Martin can comment if there's
I
any
would
more
love
money
that.
out there from the state.
Love to hear from the select board on this one.
So we got $75,000 out of I'm forgetting $150,000 request for design, and that's done. There's another potential to get money from another dam and seawall grant for construction. The max for that is $1 million, as I understand, and the removal of the dam will cost more than $1 million. And we have to match at least 25%. So if we were to get $1 million, it would cost us at least 1.25. We need a $250,000 match.
So what would the $600,000 do then?
And so it would cover the match plus some, because it may cost more than that. So in other words, let's say it costs $1.5 million. We get a $1 million grant. We have to at least match $250,000 of that, plus then we have to make up what the rest is.
So the goal is to actually remove the dam.
That's correct. Leaving some bits in place so that you recognize, historically it was a dam.
This is the gift that just keeps on giving to the town, I feel, and not in the right way, but, okay.
Is it your expectation that this $600,000 and the money that we get from the state, is this going to be the end of it? Or are we going to be sitting here in 3 years and you need another $500,000 for something else?
No, I don't think any more will be needed to remove the dam. There may be monies needed to construct the park.
Construct the park. Is the park a matter of record at this time?
Yeah, so that was when we bought the land, that was the most favored use of the land by townspeople.
Okay. And you're going to do a Friends of the Park, I hope? Sell bricks?
And probably CPC
Yes,
requests, things
please. Okay. Again, I hate this one, but
It's a good use of found money.
in the found money category, I'm okay with spending it. The next $500,000 item that I saw is P32 Affordable Housing, and I will flat out, straight up tell you I have no idea what this is for. I don't understand it, and I was too slow in asking Christine to get me clarification on this one. So I have a gigantic 5 question marks across the board on this one. Does anyone have a good grasp of what this is? Mr. Martin? Yeah, you don't need to go back to the, don't go back to the chairs.
So there are a group of people in town that are very much in favor of rehabilitating properties instead of building new ones for affordable housing. And this is seed money for that, potentially be used as a rehab trust. There's a lot of details that need to be worked out here.
Okay, so I heard you just say it's seed money for a potential forward-looking program. That would definitely fall into my third category of starting a new initiative with ongoing continuing costs, and therefore I'm going to ask for more information, but my knee-jerk reaction is this is a new initiative with ongoing continuing costs, and I don't think that's an appropriate use of ARPA funding. But I encourage you to come back and correct me on why I'm wrong and why this has to happen.
Well, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here, as I said, to figure out exactly. But and how this integrates with the AHA, and there's a lot of details. But the hope would be that the rental monies from the units would fund the acquisition of more units. So whether that ever needs additional funding, I don't know. Right? It could be self-sustaining.
The other very, very real and present question is, do you believe that you're going to have solid answers and plans on this by your October 18th deadline? And if not, I'd say let's look elsewhere.
No, we would definitely not have solid answers. But I think
I think we should.
May I make a general comment? If you don't want me to make a general
comment.
No,
yes, we've relied on you quite a bit. Please, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, but I just want to, so I think we should view this money as kind of a budget, right? It's not quite like a CPC request that gets approved and done. It's kind of like a budget. And so where, in each of these things is going to need more work, more justification to make sure that it fits the requirements of the law and is a good project. But we need to have this budget so we know what we're doing as opposed to what we're not doing. So, for example, let's take the dam as an example. If we don't fund the $600,000 here, we'd have to fund the $600,000 somewhere else, which means we need to start thinking of that for the annual town meeting and that kind of thing. And so we need to know what we're budgeting for. But I think the select board will be reviewing this budget from time to time, whether we do it on an annual basis, because I think the last of these monies would have to be spent by fiscal 25, or whether we do it on an as-needed basis. So I think we should view it as a budget.
Understood, but you did ask us to make our recommendations because you plan on having your final recommendations by October 18th, which is very fast, in my opinion.
Yes, but again, it's final recommendations for a budget. So we want to, have a list of things that are in this budget. Again, we don't want to leave it ambiguous because, again, I'll take the dam as an example, right? If we haven't decided whether or not to include the dam in the budget, then we have to assume that it's going to be in the capital budget for the next town meeting, right? So we need to know what we're funding out of these monies versus what we're funding out of other annual town meeting monies.
Okay, and I understand that there'll be some variance. I mean, these numbers are more or less conjured up out of thin air, and there's going to be quite a bit of sway one way or another when actuals come in.
And we know that a few of them are high. We know that a few of the estimates are high, and there may be lower estimates for some of them presented at the select board meeting on Monday.
Mr. Nolly.
Let me make my comment, hopefully it'll answer yours. My understanding of this entire ARPA list and process is that this is not a hard and fast thing. Decisions are not going to be made by October 18th. It's just a set of priority lists, and I think it was John Mangiarotti at the ALG meeting, or it may have been Steve Barrett, who I think said it kind of poignantly, which is anybody who's at the list, no matter where they're at on the list for the funding, once the decision's made, don't expect a check tomorrow. And if I'm not wrong, I think it's also don't expect that you'll stay on the list by the end of 3 years. Is that true as well?
I think that's a little harsh myself, right? Because, again, it's at a budget, so there's something we have to, I'll use the dam as an example, right? If the dam is on the budget to start with, and then in 6 months or whatever, or a year, if we're planning on taking the dam down at the end of next summer, and we don't have the monies, and we didn't pass something at annual town meeting, we're then stuck, right? And so, I think that's pretty harsh. But will there be additional justification for anything that's on this list before the check gets written? Absolutely, right? And there'll be, for example, I'll look to do this to Dan once more. If we were to find another source of funding, we might not need the $600,000, right? Right? If we find another grant that could give us even $200,000, then we'd need $200,000 less.
I hear that, but I would also caution you not to, if for example, if we recommend against $2 million for the sewer for AHA, and you guys go out and pound the pavement and do a fantastic job finding grants for a bunch of all these other things, and you free up $2 million because you found grants elsewhere, I don't want you to turn around and say, well, we found $2 million elsewhere, so we're just going to do this now, when we've recommended against it.
Well, we will certainly take into account the opinions of the Finance Committee and all the other sources of information. We have, the survey we've done, people sending us emails, the select board goals that we've had, that we established at the beginning of this year, the priorities that expressed by the town manager's office, things like that. So, we balance all these things. But no, I completely understand that you guys are not in favor of crossing Route 2 with the sewer.
Well, and I think to what I had asked about it being sort of a living document, I think an example of how to clarify that would be something like this water authority ask. If that ask didn't come today while we're making this list, but it came a year and a half from now when a list has already been established, and it's a good program for this list, as a living document, could items, $1.5 million of items on here just be erased so that do you expect the list to be working in that manner? Where if a greater need that's more important comes up, then other things get pushed off the list?
Again, I think that's maybe a little harsh, right? Because it depends on how far we've gotten with the things, right? For example, if we, you've mentioned a number of things for the schools here tonight that are seem to be favored by the committee, and let's say that adds up to $2 million. Are we going to take $1 million out of that and fund the water district? I doubt that we would pull money back from the schools after telling the schools that we would, that we wanted to allocate $2 million to them. On the other hand, things will move. Let's take the water district as a case. The federal infrastructure bill, the centrist bill, if you will, has $55 billion for water projects. One approach to this, and this is why we need that application process, even if, let's say we put $1 million or $2 million, whatever it is, aside for the water project, we might want to not dole it out initially. For example, we might want to dole out enough to get a shovel-ready design so that when the federal monies come along from the infrastructure bill, that we're ready for that, and then we have the rest of that money to use for something else. And we don't, since that bill is not passed, we have no idea how that money is going to be allocated, right? Is it going to be allocated like this money where it trickles down to each community and each community gets its little chunk? Or is it going to be like transportation monies where you give a design and you're granted money by the federal government? We don't know the answers to that. But we want to be ready for these projects. The water project is an excellent example.
Christy, you want to say something?
You just made me very uncomfortable with the process we're going through right now. What I'm hearing you say is effectively what you will be choosing on October 18th is how this money will be spent. That money can be moved between various buckets on it, but it's pretty much going to go for those buckets. If that's the case, we've had very little time to review this. I was kind of expecting Mr. Mangiarotti to be here tonight. I apparently was misinformed on that, but there are a number of items on here that could have ongoing costs that he didn't address. It was mentioned at the select board meeting. I think you asked a question about it. He interpreted some of the questions about ongoing costs having to relate only to hiring employees, but there are other programs in here such as the to fit in with the select board goal of increasing outside space set aside money. Is that expected to be an ongoing item or not? Is this a one-time thing we'll do with this chunk of money? There are a number of things on here that have questions like that we just don't have the information to be able to properly advise about. Our job is to provide long-term outlooks to this, and this is a place where the select board and the finance committee balance each other a little, because the select board members have a much more limited term and are elected, whereas we are supposed to take a broader view and are appointed, so don't have to take the political backlash as much on that. I'm feeling like I have a really hard time giving good recommendations on a long-term view in this very shortened timeline.
In this budget, we could leave some things unallocated, right? We could, out of the $7 million budget, if you will, $5 million and not budget $2 million until a future time. I will say for the open space thing, that's purely a decision of this process, right? So we could choose to fund $250,000 a year for 3 years, or we could choose to fund $250,000. But that certainly would not imply that you would need $250,000 out of the operating budget every year after that.
Unlike something like hiring a social worker, which would be an ongoing.
Right.
Actually, I do want to hone in on that one. That's one of the only items on this list where I looked at it and went, are we absolutely sure that's legal? Because one of the rules of ARPA is you're not allowed to put this in a stabilization fund or a future fund. So putting it in a set aside, I'm not at all sure. I would want somebody else to validate that is a legal use of this money. I'm not sure it would be. It seems highly suspect to me.
Yeah. That may very well be, but since the monies we can spend through fiscal 25, if we bought open space anytime, right between that, so we could just, in this budget, say $250,000 is for open space. And then if we get to fiscal 24 and we say we don't have any prospects to buy open space, let's use the $250,000 to buy a phone system for the school district.
So you're
Whatever.
using that as a $250,000 contingency. I prefer what you said
Budget.
earlier about, say, you'll earmark 5.5 or 6 in the beginning, and you'll hold back 1 or 1.5 for the future. I find that to be a much cleaner approach.
Sure. And
than trying to have built-in contingency.
I take that.
Mr. Majors.
Yeah, getting back to the subject of the affordable housing, I think rehabbing existing houses is a novel idea and probably a very timely one. So I would tend to support like a one-time budget line item of 300 to 500,000, but it wouldn't be ongoing. It just, like you said, seed money or start money, and just see how effective the program works. And then, in a couple of years, come back.
Thank you. I may be skipping some of these, but I want to get to the next one that I want to argue about, which is the $400,000. Which is the $400,000 for the sewer feasibility study along Route 2A. I heard what you just said about wanting to have plans shovel-ready in case there's some more money coming down the pike from other entities. And that's definitely, that makes sense to me. I'm swayed by that argument. I also liked what I heard on the long-range recovery plan meeting that occurred at 6:30 tonight, that there are theoretically ways of limiting the sewer usage to only 2 commercial enterprises. Lastly, I definitely believe that this town would be better served with more restaurants and a larger commercial base, but I am highly worried about unintended consequences about running a sewer 4 miles through one of the busiest roads in town. So I would like to, I'm not dead set against this, but I would very much like to be closely involved in what type of criteria you're putting into your RFP when you go to get this done. And as I mentioned, I believe to you earlier today, if you send out an RFP saying we need to know the absolute maximum way to, the way to absolutely maximize economic behavior in town, you're going to get one report back from your consultant. If you send out an RFP saying we want to know the way to mitigate all environmental concerns while putting in a sewer in town, you're going to get a different report back. And I would argue that you could get yet a different type of report if you, rather than looking at this strictly from how do we help businesses, which is what I heard on the LRP, to is this right holistically from the town. I would feel a lot more comfortable about voting for a project where we've paid attention to potential side effects such as, is the sewer betterment going to push out of business some of these smaller retail shops that can't compete with a restaurant? Is this going to potentially cause people who are in mixed development, and I don't know the zoning parcels as well as I should to make this comment, but do we run the risk of having smaller shops, smaller businesses get squeezed out because they're going to make a whole lot more money now that there's a sewer running down the line, and a developer can put in a much more profitable, but not necessarily better for the long-term health of our town, re-water, re-school capacity, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not, my knee-jerk reaction is anti-sewer. I am open to the concept of this being commercial only, but I have a lot of questions. And I would like to echo what Selectman Snyder Grant said, which is before we spend all $400,000 on this, can we spend a relatively small amount of money? I'm paraphrasing him now. Can we spend a relatively small amount of money and get a ballpark of what the betterment's going to be, and or get a ballpark of just how many $1 million this is going to be? Because if this comes back as a $50 million project, potentially it's a non-starter. If this comes back as a $12 million project, well, maybe it is, maybe it's worth doing. So I would say this is definitely a case where spending some money and seeing what the plan could be makes sense to me, but don't take 400 grand if you allocate 400 grand and spend it all trying to shoehorn a solution. Let's do a first sanity pass, as what Mr. Snyder Grant recommended. I've spoken a lot on this topic. Let's start it rolling again, unless you want to start this time. Roland.
I like the idea of being able to do that and be a commercial so we can, as Jason said, have more impact, restaurants and things like that. I don't want to see it hurt the businesses that are already there. And I definitely do not want to have the situation like we had with West Acton. We could put a high-pressure line in, we might put a low-pressure line in, we don't know. There was just way too many variables. And the betterments to businesses and to residents that would have impacted was out of control. So I think we really need to do, as Jason said, do a sanity check on this. See what something like that would be. And I mean, if you're going to make it too high, where, for example, like Gould's Plaza, where they have a bunch of vacancies, that's going to cost you $100 million or $1 million to tie in. He's probably not going to do it. That's going to drive up the costs. And those are the things that I really think really need to be vetted and vetted well with this. And I like the idea of taking part of it and doing a sanity check and see if it's even worth doing it.
Yeah, I think sewers along Great Road are desperately needed, and I would wholeheartedly support this. And when you think about it, well, the rumor has it that Concord will be running a water line down 2A anyway, digging up the highway, and it'd be a good time to put our sewer line right, in that trench at the same time. I mean, the road's going to be dug up, so make use of it. Also, you have to think that, remember that sewers, it's not only for restaurants. There's businesses that were lost or were preventing from moving into places like Gould's Plaza, a gym, for example, because they couldn't put a shower and, sanitary facilities in because, there was no service. So I think you have to think broader about what sewer means. And along 2A, they definitely have suffered because not having sewer available for their enterprise. So I would support this.
I definitely agree with what Mike said about, if somebody else is digging a trench already, that's the time to do it. Same concept. So, under a situation like that, it certainly deserves a look. I definitely think with any of these projects, somebody needs to come and sell them to us. Give us the details, tell us what the benefits are, tell us who's benefiting. I feel like we're looking at a lot of this stuff in a vacuum. That's the first I've heard about a potential trench being dug up Route 2A. Somebody needs to come sell these things to us.
I agree with Adam, actually. I have the same opinion. It wouldn't be on my list of highest priorities, but I can see both pros and cons to it, so I'm somewhere in the middle.
Fair enough.
I support this project, and I would love to hear further from the EDC about the companies that have chosen not to come in to Great Road because of the lack of facility, the lack of access. I'm not using the right words there. Because they literally cannot put their businesses there because they don't have the septic capacity under the current system. I think it would benefit us in general to understand that. And Mike, if you can fill in at all with the sort of information, you mentioned gyms and things like that. It sounds like these aren't necessarily big box stores that we're talking about that haven't come in. Could you fill us in, please, a little more on what sort of businesses have not been able to come to town because of the lack of this facility?
I have to make some phone calls, but these are all...
Can you, microphone?
Yeah, these are all real situations. They're not theoretical. You're talking with the Gould's Plaza, that's one of the stories that got back to the EDC is that trying to fill one of those vacant spaces with a gym-type business, the deal fell through because there was no possibility to put showers and whatever facilities like that are needed to run a successful gymnasium in this day and age, especially with all the sanitation requirements going around and COVID and whatnot. But that is a real story.
Again, I'm concerned about unintended consequences and turning over lots that were fine as I'm thinking of some of the smaller retail shops. Right now, I'm very concerned about them deciding to completely change, potentially be a type of growth that we're not necessarily looking for in this town. I thought you were accused, Mr. Noon.
This is informational.
Very well, please proceed.
We probably have the information we need to do a quick and dirty estimate of the cost of this thing. We have, a couple of years ago, we did a study to get lines into West Acton, so we know how much it costs to get a sewer line. You can, depending on what size you decide it's going to be, you can go online and get quotes for package plants for 100,000 gallons a day or 200,000 gallons a day. So you could come pretty close to your number without doing a whole lot. And I think before it could go very far, you'd have to figure out what the potential betterment would be. There is a complication. Not all businesses are the same in the views of the DEP. So restaurants are calibrated on how many gallons per seat. Some other businesses are based on the number of employees in it. So a big box store is probably the least water, usage. You're going to have restaurants that are probably one of the more intensive. But it varies. For every business group, the state has a guideline as to what your capacity needs to be. So, but I still think, without spending much money at all, we probably have enough information or can find it relatively easy to get a ballpark of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Oh, and somebody better ask the DEP about putting a sewer line and a water line in the same trench.
Too bad we can't hook them together. Anyway, let's see. Okay. What else do we want to talk about tonight? Next, almost $500,000 item on the list here that I see here is a permitting system for the town. I'm inclined to support this, but I would like to know more information about how we've been getting along for the last couple of decades. Do we not already have a permitting system? And is this a rip and replace for the munis that we already have? Or is this just getting munis to work better? Or is this a whole new system? And does this have to be on ARPA?
So I think Mr. Mangiarotti wrote back saying this cost was an estimate. They've reduced the amount to $150K now, and they're considering applying for a community compact grant to pay for some of the implementation costs that were assumed in the initial number.
Excellent. So if there's...
Technology would require annual user licenses in addition to upfront implementation and training costs.
That's multiple strikes in my book. I would pull it off the ARPA list and find money for it elsewhere and accuse it of having ongoing costs. So I'm trying to thin this down to about $5 million, $5.5 million for you, Mr. Martin. And I'm not there yet because I'm still at 6.07. So I got to cut even more. Okay. We've been through about 20 of these. Do we want to do the rest of this list, or do we feel that we have given appropriate guidance? Do you want to keep going? Do you want to do all 43 of these? Okay. I
much
don't
have we
think I've got
covered?
about 20.
No, I mean, in terms of dollar amounts, how much have we?
Let's stop at
a lot.
100,000. When we get below 100,000, we could stop.
Okay.
How's that sound?
I think that's a
There's
good
only,
compromise.
there's only a couple under 100,000. There's 6, 8, 10. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we'll keep going. Let's see, the last thing I did was the permitting system, right? Okay. $400,000 for Mass Avenue, Gardner Field, streets and parking. I have this as a nice to have. I don't have this as a we got to do it, and I don't have this as a no thank you. What is, anyone else want to advocate for this one?
What P number?
15, P15. Mr. Majors?
I support it because Gardner Field is a town, a community asset that, something that we should support and encourage. Parking is an issue, and I think anything that would help that, the park and the parking, there is a parcel of land, I think, next to, off of on Great Road, that they would create parking. Is that true?
On 111?
Not great, right?
I mean, excuse me, one on,
Massa.
where am I?
Yes. Mass Ave.
Mass Ave, excuse me.
I don't think there's anything definite at this point. There have been some thoughts, there's been some pushback, and so it needs more work.
Well, it needs parking, and I think it would also help all the businesses in West Acton Village, so I would support it.
Christie?
I have heard some of the concerns and share some concerns about how it would limit the use of that lot. My understanding, I haven't seen pictures, but if you're talking about taking part of that lot and turning it into a parking lot, then what is it talking about doing?
It's next to it. It's not taking some of the lot.
The lot is on both sides as houses.
Yes, the parking the proposed parking is to the east of the house, whereas the Gardner Field is to the left of the house.
Gardner Field has houses on each side.
Right.
Where would the parking go?
If you're standing at True West and you're looking over, there's Gardner Field. Farther to the east, there's a house or a duplex or something like that. And farther to the left, to the east, there is some land that is,
Oh, I thought this was in Gardner Field. Okay,
no.
I removed my objection then.
There was controversy years ago where the town wanted to make that into a parking lot, and the residents pushed back who live in the condos next to it. I think there's 4 of them or 6 of them, something. One resident, yeah, but they still pushed back and they swayed town meeting.
They did.
So I think that's something that kind of has to be taken into consideration too.
Quickly.
This is also, these monies would also be used for streetscape things to make the streets in West Acton look more modern. Has been supported by the business community there.
Yep. I have it as a nice to have. I think we're going to run out of money before we get to that one, personally. Next, $400,000 thing that I saw, where was it? Sorry. Oh, $425,000 P4, K extended day revenue shortfall. This is a straight up revenue shortfall. This is about as clear as a COVID-related hole in the budget as you can find. I think this is a no-brainer. I think we fund this one right from the start. P4. Anyone else? Anyone care to disagree with me on this one? That was easy. Appreciate easy. NARA boardwalk and walkways. Again, I have this as a nice to have. This in Gardner Field, I would really love to do, but I fear that we're going to run out of money before we get there. This is a feel-good thing. This is an investment in the future thing. It was on the SIP, so it meets a bunch of my criteria. I don't think it has any significant ongoing costs, so I'm inclined to support it. I'm just worried that when we get down to the last $1 million, this may not make the cut for the last $1 million. Mr. Nolde.
I agree with you. It kind of fits in the bucket with the Gardner Field proposal. I also suspect the cost of it wouldn't be $400,000.
And
unless it includes a lot of other betterments, which it could.
Well, everything seems to cost more than I expected to, so yeah, that's a possibility. $350,000 to update the complete streets plan. My question on this is, don't we review the complete street plan like every single year? So where is this requirement coming from? And don't we already have a complete streets plan? And isn't that something that is reviewed on a regular basis anyway and should already be part of the existing budget? Am I wrong?
I'm not the expert here. I don't know if Mr. Barrett has more information, but I believe the complete streets plan we have now was actually done quite a long time ago and is maybe not up to date for, what we tend to do now as far as complete streets, so.
Mr. Barrett, would you care to weigh in?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, thank you. So I would, P20.
Looking at the draft plan that is on the ARPA website.
Do I have a typo?
No, well, I don't know if you made up the spreadsheet, but that says $35,000 for
So I have a
P20.
typo.
Because that's a big difference.
Yep, that's me having a typo. And yes, I made this sheet. Okay. 35 grand. So we took it out of order.
That's much better.
Okay. Okay, good. I had a typo on that one. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay, we're down to, I believe we're down to $300,000 for a social worker full-time employee. And again, I'm conflicted on this one. I suspect that this is probably something we want to do as a town, but I'm not sure we want to do it in ARPA funding for the straightforward reason of this is absolutely an ongoing new headcount that's going to be with us for the entirety of the rest of my mortgage on my house and probably everyone else's mortgage in town here too. So I am kind of philosophically against doing continuing programming with one-time money. I would say, please pull this from the ARPA list, and if this is a clear and present need of the town, then bring it as part of your regular budget within the constraints of Prop 2.5 and make sure that you make your case as to why we need it as an ongoing thing and don't pull it from one-time monies.
Agreed.
Ms. Anderson.
My understanding is, or my suspicion is that this came out of the short-term goal for the select board to form a social services committee that can explore a team of therapists and social workers in an effort to increase mental health resources available to the community. Having a full-time social worker is not clear to me it would do that. This feels very, if that's what it's in response to, this is putting the cart before the horse in terms of not having had that committee do any work to determine whether we have someone. As you said, having a new full-time employee is very expensive, not only because you have to pay them, but you don't get rid of them, ever.
It's in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Plus 3% per year raises.
So again, Mr. Mangiaratti's comment says that the position would actually be added in financial year '23. So would that be now?
But if we support this,
Yeah.
that position will happen.
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think we should pull it from ARPA, and they should bring it as part of their regular budget if they want it.
So there was a question from this group saying, how will this request be funded once the ARPA funds are spent supporting it? And the answer was operating budget or grants or some combination thereof.
Right, so.
At
but they're-
100 grand a year.
So you're using you get in, you try this now for cheap, but then you own it for the rest of perpetuity, and I don't like that approach, and I don't want it to go that way for this item.
I would also like to understand, which Mr. Mangiaratti did not respond to my question about it, how common is a position like this for a town of our size? And I have a few friends who are social workers, and they work with something very different than what I'm hearing here, is a desire for the town to have. They provide a variety of resources to people who are in great need, generally socioeconomic. And I have not been able to get an answer on how much of the population would benefit from this and where else they would be getting it. Is it really addressing a part of the community in giving them access they don't otherwise have? I know getting access to social work in general is a problem, but that's a whole other different part of the system that we're not going to get out of $100,000. I'm hoping you know something about this.
Don't we have a social worker? Haven't we had a social worker for years?
We have a community services director, and we have what was a part-time social worker in the police department, now in the recent grant, a full-time social worker in the police department.
Yep.
The community services director has been obviously very busy during COVID.
No doubt. Yeah, I tend to agree with Jason. I never liked using one-time money for recurring costs.
Mr. Borden?
I think the town maybe should look at a way of maybe doing contract services or something like this. Whereas maybe we don't need somebody full-time, maybe we need somebody 20 hours a week, kind of like you do at the regional housing office. I just think it might be for any of the staff that we're looking at right now. You know, do we really need full-time employees, or do we something like we do with the regional housing office, where we give X number of dollars to fund that, and it's done with a bunch of other towns, so we're kind of splitting the cost type of thing. And I think that might be something that we should be looking more at for our services at town, instead of just adding staff. I'm not saying there's not a need there. I'm just saying that I think we just got to think of better ways to use the funds that we have, and using one-time money like this is not the way to go.
And I would like to now jump to the next FTE and basically say ditto on the entire topic, the Grant Administrator Procurement Officer. While I believe that it is entirely probable that the town administration will be able to make their case for why they need a Grant Administrator Procurement Officer, they might have the metrics to show how it's going to be worthwhile. I think that is something that should be done through regular order and not done through one-time money. So I would like to say ditto to P42, as we said, for the social worker P23. Mr. Nolde.
Yeah, I agree 100%. There's no question that what Mr. Mangiarotti has brought to this town with regard to his magical ability to go out and find federal funding, another grant, is fantastic.
Should be lauded.
And there's no question that to hire someone to administrate that type of duty has a financial benefit to the town, but that financial benefit is very easy to justify in the budget by itself. Whereas if this 275 can be freed up to be spent on something that is a bigger priority, then it should be spent on a bigger priority.
Thank you. Public health services and supplies, $200,000. This is a backfill of what we spent last year. Fits in the same category as this was a direct COVID cost. This is a no-brainer. This should be taken off the top and approved. Right below it, COVID mitigation, the April return to school. This was money the school district spent to get the kids back in the classrooms. It's a no-brainer. It's a direct COVID cost. This is what the ARPA fund is for. It should be approved forthwith and dispatched with immediately, in my humble opinion, as I speak very authoritatively here. Outdoor classrooms for all the elementary schools. I have this as a nice to have, not as a we got to do it. I think that at least for the next year, probably for the next couple of years, there is a public health reason why having these outdoor classrooms is probably a good idea. There might be ongoing reasons why this is healthy for the kids to get some outdoor time rather than just staring at a smart screen all the time. So maybe it's worthwhile, but I am concerned that it's not going to rise to the first $7 million that I think we absolutely have to spend. So I have it as if we can afford it, great. If we get some funds elsewhere and some of these other things get granted and funded, great. But I don't have this as we got to do this in the first phase. Anyone care to disagree? I can see I'm losing my audience. I'll try and go more quickly. Emergency rental assistance. Would somebody care to speak more to this? Because I don't, P35. P35. I don't have a good handle on this one.
I'll speak to it. We're still having significant problems with people being able to pay their rent. The federal eviction moratorium, I believe, has ended. So this is a way to not only help people stay in their homes, but to help landlords, many of whom are, I think like 85% of whom are small building owners. They have one or two properties. They're not large corporations who don't have access to the money in other ways. So this has significant benefit for people, and a lot of this is directly due to COVID. So for me, it falls into the COVID mitigation bucket and is not intended as an ongoing program as I understand it. So we're not looking at something that expends the budget going forward.
Very good. Mr. Martin?
Just for background information there, we funded this twice out of stimulus money, COVID stimulus money last year in 2 tranches. This would continue that.
Okay. Funnily enough, I have it in my one category, even though I didn't have full understanding of what it was. Next one, going to tread lightly here, Mr. Noon. Item new 1, Hvac Sewer Treatment Facility, $300,000. I'm calling it new 1.
Oh, right, because it's not on the list, I'm sorry.
Okay, new 1 is Hvac Sewer Treatment Facility, $300,000. It is not school-related, it is not part of the SIP, it is not continuing, in my opinion. And new 2 is the Water District PFAS mitigation for $2 million, not school-related, not SIP, not continuing. My understanding is this is not the full, this $300,000 does not cover the full mitigation need of the problem that this particular water treatment, that this sewer treatment plant has. This is something that actively feeds a commercial part in town, the Red Raven complex is my understanding, as well as some residences.
So there's about 300 residences, mostly condominiums. All of the Hvac Mall, all of the Hvac Office Park, including Insulet. And so it is a privately owned, the condominium, Hvac condominium owns the treatment plant. We bought it 6 years ago because the DEP required somebody to buy it because they were relieving the prior owner of his permit. The town at the time did not want to buy it. So the condominium stepped up because it impacts our property values. If you can't flush your toilet, you can't live there. So we've been putting about $100,000 each year towards capital. We're on a program with the state to improve the facility. We were hit pretty hard with COVID. Our commercial revenue went down by about 30%. The restaurants closed, the office park was empty. So we're attempting to fill that gap, the equipment end of it. We have the same problems that the town meeting approved the $5 million for the South Acton plant in terms of age. We're twice as old as that one. But in order to expand the capacity, we have to get rid of groundwater and other intrusion into our system, which is a tough problem to do, and we don't have the money to do it, and we're unlikely to have that money. We don't have the ability to charge betterments, so everything has to come out of the ratepayers' base. For the ratepayers to do it, then we're asking them to pay more so we can expand and allow Insulet to expand, it's a difficult problem, but Insulet right now would like to expand, small expansion, but we can't authorize that. We've been told the restaurants want to expand, but we can't do that. We had to turn down a guy in Nauset Path that wanted to add a bedroom because we can't do it.
Will the Insulet expansion trigger a reassessment of taxation?
No, it's a pretty small, they're right up against their, everybody has a gallons per day limit set by the DEP, and that 100
But so if they get
park came with a limit of how much they can do, and they're right up to it, and they want to convert some, I think some warehouse space into office space, but warehouse space has a different rate of flushing.
So if they get their expanded capacity, we're not going to get any more tax dollars out of them?
No.
Yeah.
So we're not, talking about North Acton, you're talking about all the same problems Mike was talking about in terms of businesses not being able to do anything because we can't get the capacity to flush the toilet. So what we're looking at is spending the money to take care of all of our infiltration problems, which we had a study done a couple of years ago. And there's probably 150,000 gallons of infiltration into the system. And with that, we could expand our capacity.
So my take on this is something that already exists. This is a fix. This would qualify as long-term investment. I'm not sure this is directly COVID related, other than
the lack of money. Yes.
The need is from COVID.
Would the system have broken down anyway?
System's not broken. It can't be expanded, and it needs recurring.
The system needs money because with COVID, no one paid he said they can't charge a betterment. And because of COVID, no one had sewer bills to pay, which means they didn't get the income to be able to afford to do this.
My 100,000 I usually get to put to capital didn't happen last year.
Okay.
Because no one went to the office parks or the restaurants.
Avalon, what do they do?
They have their own.
Okay.
Another part to point out, I listened to the women speak at the select board meeting, is that because of the size of this plant and because of how it is owned, they don't have access to state money, federal money.
I remember that, yep.
So they kind of need this. Like, this is really hard money to come by.
It's 2/3 the size of the South Acton plant. 300,000 gallon per day permit. We have a 200,000 gallon per day permit. They needed $5 million to upgrade a 20-year-old plant. We're looking for $300,000 to help upgrade a 50-year-old plant. 50. Yeah.
What do we think?
I'm in favor of it, because I also look at it as a health concern as well.
Fair enough.
And if if they can do that to upgrade the facility, that can also help drive business in that area as well. I mean, I understand that Red Raven is struggling. I don't know.
They changed owners. Ownership's changing in January.
Okay, so that's what I heard. I want to see businesses succeed. I also want to see the residents stay healthy, because if it becomes a bigger health concern, then it's going to be even worse on the town and on the environment. So I think we should support this one.
Mr. Wallenhoff? Mr. Majors? Mr. Nolde? You can't talk to it. You just did. You made it clear that you're for it. Okay, I think we've spoken enough on this topic. Next, we have only a couple of these left. $250,000 from open space set aside. We talked about this already. I'm not even sure it's legal. It sounds like it's a contingency plan. It should be pulled.
On that, we have CPC funding. Every year money goes into it. Many times we don't spend the money. It's there. We're bonded Wright Hill. which I wasn't in favor of. I think we should have paid it, we had the cash. I don't like this at all. Just keep doing it about CPA funding, and I think we're fine. I don't think we should put, and I agree, I don't think it's legal either.
Anybody want to take the other side of that coin? Anyone want to defend $250,000 for a set aside? Moving right along. Sustainability, electric vehicles, solar arrays, et cetera. It's $200,000. I have this as a nice to have, not as a gotta have it. I suspect that at least one or two members on this committee is going to take the gotta have it side. Who wants to take the gotta have it side?
I'm kind of midway on it. I suspect that this is offsetting some of what would normally be in the operating budget in terms of electric vehicle replacement, et cetera. So it's unclear to me what the true cost is on this, but it's also unclear to me that it is adding cost ongoing to the budget.
I don't think it's adding ongoing. My concern is that it's taking found money to accelerate a purchase that would have happened as the vehicles aged out anyway.
You have less of an issue with that.
Okay. Anyone want to take the gotta spend the money now? I'm sensing tepid to lukewarm response to P7.
You're talking about electric vehicles and
Yeah.
versus charging stations, right?
The electric vehicles might allow us to, for example, do a pilot program with electric cruisers.
Yeah, again, it
Don't we
seems
have
like,
Don't we have electric cruisers?
We have
Sorry,
hybrid
sorry.
cruisers.
what?
Go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I think the writing on the wall that most vehicles in the future will be electric, whether we want it or not. It's coming, because that's what manufacturers are going to be making and only making, and so we might as well start.
Quickly.
I could see throwing in more charging stations around town. But, I mean, as you're replacing vehicles as a town, you should be looking at the most modern technology anyway, and that should be in the budget. It shouldn't be coming out of one-time money.
I agree. I concur.
That
Mr.
would
Nolan.
have been my statement, that it's already a budgeted item. Show me where this is, adding benefit.
Fair enough.
I changed my point of view to yours. I actually think this should be in the normal budget.
Yep. Also on the topic of, it's not, I don't think it hits on the $100,000 list, but there's another entry in here. Yeah, P19 EV charger incentives. I'm against, even though it's under the $100,000 limit that we were going to talk about, I want to talk about it briefly because I believe while we may need them more in town, especially if this is going to be done at businesses, this is a net positive for the business. This is not something that should be spent out of public funds. This is something that makes a business more attractive. This is a business expense. This is not a town expense, in my opinion. Next $100,000 thing is the water main in Kelly's Corner. It's been pulled. $200,000 for a second park between the AHA and the dog park. I don't even want to talk about this one.
Same bucket as the boardwalk and the West Acton Park.
I don't even have it in the same bucket as the, I have NARA and West Acton as a nice to have. I have this as a not recommended. While I understand that the AHA has a plan, has a responsibility to remake that whole area and make it as wonderful as it possibly can, there's got to be a septic field there. There's got to be there's going to be a dog park there. This feels like it's a giveaway to try and mollify a relatively small number of people, or it should already be part of the AHA project already and should not require extra money from ARPA. AHA should have been planning on what to do with that space anyway because they're taking over all of that land. So unlike NARA, where I think it's actually bettering for everyone, I think you're trying to squeeze a second park into a spot where you're already having a park and you already have landscaping for a public housing AHA system. So I'm against it.
Mr. Martin.
Just a comment on the facts, and at this larger property, there are 3 parcels. I call them left, center, and right. The left one is the dog park. The center one is owned by the town, has nothing in it currently. The right one is the housing project. So this is a piece of, that the center one is the smallest parcel. It's owned by the town. And some people are advocating having a senior park in that area. So that's what that's for.
Okay.
What do you do in a senior park, Dave? I'm a senior, I need to know.
So there are a number of less intense, I forget what, there's a term for them, less intense exercise things. In other places, like you might take a grandparent might take a young grandchild, you know, things like that. So it's not designed yet, obviously, so.
Ms. Majors?
Yeah, normally I would agree with you on that, but since that parcel is such a key element of, you know, it's the first thing you see as you come into Acton off of Route 2, that parcel is very critical. The dog park has no money to do what needs to be done, or at least they don't have the money to do it the way it should be done. I'm talking landscaping-wise, and I think that whole area along 27 needs to be professionally landscaped, and the parcel that you're talking about, the middle, that's currently unused, it's, you know, it needs to be, somebody has to come up with a plan, and I think a park for the people is, you know, with a gazebo or something like that would be a perfect use for useless land. I mean, meaning useless in the terms that you can't build anything else on it. So we might as well make it functional as a nice, attractive piece of landscape that as you drive down 27, you'll be proud of, to say this is a pretty town. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Majors. P17 loans for energy efficiency. Again, I don't think this is mandatory, and I'm not sure that this is something that should be paid for by the town. Signage along Great Road, P18, I think it's a good idea. Not only signage along Great Road, but signage along the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. This is part of the LRRP. This is a part of the LRRP that I agree with. I think this is a good idea. It helps people that are riding through town find ways of spending their money in our town. Scrolling down the list here, I think we're getting near the end. Yes.
I actually had that in the nice to have category. While I like the idea of signage, this feels a little bit like a fun thing to do. Not fun, but a nice thing to do simply because it's found money and is not in any way a response to COVID.
I can see that. I do think, though, that it's part of the, if I'm going to be so dead set against, or potentially dead set against sewerage along 2A, I think doing something for the businesses is worthwhile. That is the end of the greater than $100,000 items on this list. Mr. Martin, do you feel that you've been given some guidance and direction, or are you going to walk away from here with muddled opinions?
So I was going to say, if you can provide me, or if the committee can provide me with a recommendation, either yes, no, or nothing, and optionally a one-sentence explanation, I will read them as we're discussing each item on Monday. I mean, otherwise I'll try, I did not take notes here, right. So or you could just provide me with a list.
Okay.
Jason did take notes, and as a fellow committee member, I would be very comfortable with Jason's notes being that presentation for the board.
So for the items under 100 grand, if there's something that you feel you absolutely have to have, email me within the next 48 hours so that I can get this list over to him as soon as possible. Is that fair? Is that fair?
Yeah, and that's reasonable.
Mr. Martin, my understanding is the next step in the process is that the select board will vote tentatively on the 4th about what items should be on the final list, and then we'll finalize that vote on the 18th?
Yes, that's right. So we hope to give direction to the town manager to produce a final plan, and what should be included in the plan. And then the town manager's plan would be a little bit more specific, maybe with optimized dollar values or things like that, or what years it might fall in and things. So, October 4th, give direction to the town manager for the final plan. October 18th, vote on the final plan.
And the idea is the October 4th, meaning you will come out of something that adds up to the 7 million that we have?
Well, we'll see. I intend to go through the items one by one during the meeting, unless the other board members really don't want to do that, but that's my intent going in.
Okay, because we do have time for a meeting. We have a meeting planned between those.
Between now and October 4th?
No, between October 4th and the 18th when they finalize.
Yes,
I think we need to have this for them by the 4th.
I appreciate that. What I'm saying is that after they have a finalized list on October 4th and before they have formalized it, we have a chance to review the
That's a
October
great
4th
idea.
finalized list.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, on the 12th.
Yep, very good. Okay, I think we've beaten that horse for now.
It is 10:20. Would you like to take a break and reconvene? Would you like to go straight to the point of view? No. Okay. We have lost our clerk, so for the next meeting, we need to decide what we're going to do about that position. If anybody's interested in taking the position of clerk, feel free to reach out to me in the meantime. And Christine Russell. I'd like to move to approve the minutes of August 3rd that were sent to us. Did you
So
all have a
moved.
chance to review those?
There were some changes.
With amendments.
I wasn't aware of any changes or amendments except for the August 3rd.
It's the one that went out earlier today.
Wasn't that a July meeting? It was August 3rd. Okay. So,
There were two amendments that I sent to, there were two changes I sent to Christine. There was a typo in the first paragraph where it was asked, it should have been asked, and the second thing is that
Okay.
Sahana should have been listed as clerk.
then that's my misunderstanding, because I thought that was a July meeting minutes, and I thought that was separate from the August 3rd. So I will revise my motion to approve the minutes for August 3rd as revised.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All against, say nay. Okay. And liaison reports. Nobody.
Dave?
No liaison
Okay.
report.
I motioned we adjourn.
What about, do you want to hear the ALG report?
I have to.
Yes.
All right, so Christine Russell and I attended the ALG meeting on the 23rd. The school board shared their concerns about FEMA and COVID reimbursements of $650,000 flowing back into the E&D. I think wasn't there a question about whether or not that $650 was actually forthcoming from the FEMA? David, do you remember, or do you recall?
Yes, there is some confusion. I mean, I'm not the source of the information here, but there is some confusion about them getting the reimbursement. that they
Yeah,
applied for.
they may not get it, I think was the sentiment. They're concerned about their revolving accounts, which are down about 60% due to lack of revenue as a result of COVID issues with students not being in school and not collecting revenues in those accounts. And they've had a lot of trouble finding staff in many of the supporting roles within the schools. And they're going to get back to us later regarding if there's any cost savings in that and whether that cost savings can be used elsewhere, but they're going to continue to have problems with that. The Damon Building debt falls off in '24. The RJ Gray and high school debt falls off in '26. Let me see. There was a question raised whether they should set a target for a free cash recommendation for the school district, such as we did for the town. We'll be discussing that at the next meeting in November. And we're keeping all the same budgetary schedule for the meeting, which is now May 16th, the town meeting for May 16th next year, but all of the other budgetary schedule items will remain the same. I'm going to turn this over to you, Jason.
When you're done, when you're done.
That's really it. That was the last for the ALG.
Okay. I'm going to potentially overstep my bounds here and ask that we all have homework. We all have a copy of the draft point of view in our hands now. It was delivered to us at the beginning of this meeting. Everyone should review this and send their comments and additions and changes to both Christina and Mike by Tuesday of next week so that they can make adjustments in advance of our next meeting. That is homework that should be on everyone's head. Isha?
I move that we adjourn this meeting.